Good to see you, good to see you, good to see you. So glad that we could engage with each other here tonight. I'm sorry for the slight delay in starting tonight's program. Was very busy at the pencil factory making pencils. You know how that works. The demand for pencils is very, very high these days. Just kidding, just kidding. Just kidding. You all know that's an inside joke about pencil factories and unnamed diet beverage and all of that. There you go. There you go. There you go. Good times. Good times. So, folks, plenty that we can talk about. All eyes are on the Middle East right now. All eyes are on the Middle East. Really interesting developments. Before we get going here, be sure to hit the like button. Be sure to hit the subscribe button. Be sure to hit the notifications bell. You always want to be here. Notifications help you be here. It's Wednesday night. I'm here in my lovely Brooklyn apartment, and we are ready to talk. We are ready to talk. Hit the like button. Hit the subscribe button. The way we do this, I give my opening remarks. After I give my opening remarks, at that point, after I give my opening remarks, then we do our roll call, where I call you out as I see you, names and locations. Then I answer your super chat questions for the rest of the night, and then we're done. That's how it works. So there you go. So let's hope that some of those libertarians are around. That last live was wild. I mean, we got raided by followers of Sticks and Hammer. Sticks and Hammer. Sticks and Hammer. Sticks and Hammer. We got followed by Sticks and Hammer fans. They all piled in here. It was great. I gained like 100 subscribers in 40 minutes. Got a whole bunch of super chats. They may not have been saying nice things to me, but the money is just as good. Yeah, it was pretty hilarious. Pretty hilarious. No, so Cia is telling me it's Stixhexenhammer. Stixhexenhammer. Right. It's still not a rational name, but there you go. There you go. Here I am. Rock me like a hurricane. It's a lovely day. I do have unnamed orange beverage. Orange, you glad I have orange beverage? And, yeah. So we will just kind of jump into our opening remarks. Like I said, shoot me a super chat. If you send a super chat, I will give you an answer. That's what really makes the second half of the show. Super chats are what it's all about. Yeah. So there we go. So what I was referring to in the opening is that apparently a Patriot missile has hit a site in Israel, a nuclear reactor in Israel, according to the reports. Cia Invent. That's an odd question. I'm writing it down. Thanks for the super chat. It was hit. Israel is now unloading bombs for how many times have they done this? They're unloading bombs on Damascus, the capital of the Syrian Arab Republic. America is all about freedom for libertarians to give communists money. Exactly. I couldn't agree more. Could not agree more with that. But yes, and so we have, we are watching what could be unfolding now. Why this Israeli nuclear reactor was attacked? Peru elections. Why this Israeli reactor was attacked? We don't really know. And we do know that they're bombing Damascus again. Don't know who that is. Don't know who that is, DNB. I don't know who that is, so I can't answer that question. So that's very, very, very disturbing. It's certainly disturbing to see what's going on there. We also know that the government in Kiev is shelling eastern Ukraine, and that is not a good situation, trying to intensify the conflict between the Kiev regime that was installed by the United States in 2014 and the Euromaidan coup, as well as the there you go. Is entropy a universal truth? Entropy, a universal truth. Good question. What stops you from turning into a social democrat? What reassures you the communist road? What stops you from being SOCDEM? What reassures you? Revolution. Alrighty, very good super chat questions. But yeah, we're keeping our eye on the whole situation in the Middle East. We're keeping our eye on it because it's a very volatile situation. Things could really blow up. Things could really blow up in Ukraine very soon, as the escalation is there. On top of that, things could really blow up in the South China Sea. We know there is an escalation at this point, with the United States, giving more and more weapons to Taiwan, trying to provoke a situation where China would be, forced basically into a military retake of the mainland, which is not what China wants. China believes that Taiwan will rejoin the mainland at some point, but it will do so gradually through economic incentive, etc. Taiwan is China and has always been China. I mean, Taiwan was China since before Christopher Columbus arrived in the United States. Taiwan even calls itself the Republic of China, right? It's one country, two systems, so it's certainly disturbing. It's certainly disturbing to see an escalation of attempts to provoke. It seems like this is the new strategy. It's a new strategy that is being carried out. It's not really a new strategy, but it seems like, you can really draw a parallel to what's going on, to what happened during the presidency of Jimmy Carter, right? Jimmy Carter called himself a student of Zbigniew Brzezinski. And, Zbigniew Brzezinski, he was from the Center for Communist Studies, World War III inevitable, from the Center for Communist Studies at the Columbia University, and he was one of the more strategic, forces that didn't favor an escalation. Gorbachev selling off Soviet farms as cooperatives during Paris. Gorbachev. All as co-ops. And Brzezinski came out of the Center for Communist Studies at Columbia University. The USA had been defeated in Vietnam, and because the United States had been defeated in Vietnam, the more strategic wing of U.S. foreign policy, the folks that emphasize more covert operations rather than direct military interventions, those folks had the upper hand. So there you go. Are we better off with the Democrats in charge of the U.S.? Okay. Better with Dems. And disagreeing with Marx. Right. Perm, Rev, Marx. All right. I'm just writing down a lot of your super chats as they boil in here. Misreading Marx. Okay. So there you go. And Zbigniew Brzezinski, he worked with Henry Kissinger. Henry Kissinger was also another strategist, someone who worked in the Nixon administration. Henry Kissinger and Zbigniew Brzezinski, they came up with an institution called the Trilateral Commission. And this was a think tank developed, to replan and reorient U.S. foreign policy in the aftermath of the Cold War. Loving WACB, love the work you do. Thanks, Caleb. I don't know what WACB is. Favorite communist poets. All right. Most poets. Wow, a lot to talk about. And they reoriented U.S. foreign policy. And the Trilateral Commission, most of the Carter administration came out of the Trilateral Commission. And it was about, oh, we are city builders. That's what you meant. Okay. Most of the Trilateral Commission, or most of the Carter administration, came out of the Trilateral Commission. And the Trilateral Commission was about reorienting U.S. foreign policy to be more effective in the aftermath of the defeat of the United States in Vietnam. And that reorientation, you had Jimmy Carter, who referred to himself as a student of Zbigniew Brzezinski. Brzezinski was himself Polish, had a big hatred and contempt for Russians on like an ethnic level, had, grown up in a Polish Catholic family that hated the Russians. And his whole thing was to manipulate communists against each other. Communist rappers. Fave. Communist rappers. Don't know who that is. And manipulating communists against each other, utilizing proxy forces. And immediately, in the Carter administration, we saw this strategic retreat of the United States. The United States, its presence around the world in terms of the military was kind of rolled back. But at the same time, there was an escalation of U.S. use of proxy forces. For example, the most blatant example was later we had an admission from Zbigniew Brzezinski about the Afghan trap. You can Google the Afghan trap. That in the 1990s, Zbigniew Brzezinski gave an interview where he admitted that basically what happened in Afghanistan was that Afghanistan, 1978, you had the Sour Revolution. And this was a revolution in Afghanistan that was premature. Basically, the Afghan monarchy started killing all the communists. So the communists and the pro-Soviet elements within the Afghan military and others, they had no choice but to overthrow the government in order to not be killed. So they tore down the walls of the jail where communists were held, and they overthrew the government, and they established in 1978 the People's Democratic Republic of Afghanistan. And it was preemptive. It was forced on them, right? They were not ready to take power and establish a socialist government, but it was forced on them. Purpose of the secret speech. Right? And even though, what do you do to relax? Relax. So at that point, you had the People's Democratic Republic of Afghanistan, the People's Democratic Party take power in Afghanistan. They were very strong in the urban areas where the Soviet Union had a lot of influence, but they didn't have very much of a following in the rural areas. The rural parts of Afghanistan, you had a lot of very, very religious people who resented and were very opposed to the Soviet Union and communism. And so, almost immediately, you had disagreements between the rural folks in the Afghan countryside and the People's Democratic Party that was pro-Soviet and Marxist-Leninist in its orientation. So at that point, Zbigniew Brzezinski mobilized with a young Saudi by the name of Osama bin Laden to build a Wahhabi army of Sunni extremists to go to Afghanistan and start an insurgency against the Afghan government. They were called the Mujahideen. That means, means holy warriors. And the Mujahideen, this army of supporters of Osama bin Laden and Wahhabi religious fanatics, piled into Afghanistan. And Zbigniew Brzezinski said this was all planned, right? And eventually the Soviet Union had to send its military into Afghanistan to protect the People's Democratic Party, and they didn't want a mess of Wahhabi extremism right on their border. So the Soviet Union was forced to intervene in Afghanistan, and Brzezinski had pulled it off. He knew he could force the Soviets to intervene in Afghanistan. But then, of course, did the United States say, well, the Soviets had to intervene because there's this, there was this violent, there was this revolution in Afghanistan, which is right on their border, and then there's this insurgency. It makes sense. Of course not. The United States said, oh my goodness, the aggressive communist Soviets are invading poor little Afghanistan. The United States boycotted the Olympics, you'll remember. Chilean miracle. Boycotted the Olympics. Australia. China. And, the United States put sanctions on the Soviet Union that devastated American farmers, by the way. American farmers, they could no longer sell wheat and agricultural products to the Soviet Union, and it created a farm crisis in the United States. You talk about Farm Aid, you hear about Willie Nelson, a lot of American singers, performed at concerts for Farm Aid. What that was about was that the sanctions put on the Soviet Union in response to the intervention in Afghanistan devastated American farmers, and that was kind of the beginning of the end of the small family farm in the United States. Was the forcing of the Soviet Union to intervene in Afghanistan. Okay, a photo with AOC cancels. Wrote it down. All right. Just writing them all down. Thanks everyone for being patient. I kind of get caught here because every time a super chat comes in, I have to write it down, so I can't always finish the thought I have in my head. So thank you for sticking around and being patient. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. So basically, the Soviet Union, Brzezinski's strategies, Zbigniew Brzezinski, the Cold War strategist, maneuvered in a way that forced the Soviet Union to intervene in Afghanistan, and then used that to condemn the Soviet Union as aggressive, and that this was a way that the United States, in the aftermath of being defeated in Vietnam, could kind of clean up its image. The United States had to look like it was not the aggressor. It had, and so by, creating a situation using proxies like Osama bin Laden, the United States was able to make the Soviet Union look like the aggressor in Afghanistan. That's what they were able to do. And there were other examples of this during the Carter administration. The most blatant example was the United States backing Saddam Hussein when he attacked the Islamic Republic of Iran. I don't talk about people I work with. Come on. Well, I can comment a little bit. All right. Richard Wolff. All right. And, the United States backed Iraq attacking Iran in the aftermath of the Islamic Revolution. Iraq used chemical weapons. It was awful. And, at least 1 million people died in that war. Later on in the war, the United States then started selling missiles to Iran, and that became scandalous. There was the infamous Iran-Contra that came later in the 1980s. The United States, kind of switched sides in the war. About halfway through the war, at first the United States backed Iraq, then the United States backed Iran, and it was a situation like that where two anti-imperialist countries, Ba'athist Arab socialism in Iraq, Islamic revolutionary, Shia Islam in Iran, were played against each other, and both sides were significantly weakened. Huge humanitarian cost to that war. It was absolutely horrendous. I've been to Iran. I've seen how in every neighborhood they have on display the faces of all the martyrs from that neighborhood. Teenage boys, young men who gave their lives to fight the Iraqi invaders. That war very, very much. All right, Saddam Hussein. So there you go. There you go. So there you go. And yeah, also during the Carter presidency, you had the Kampuchea War. So you had, in Cambodia, there were two, Cambodia was just devastated by U.S. bombing, right? The USA just destroyed Cambodia. Cambodia got into huge amounts of debt buying agricultural products from the United States. The pro-U.S. regime in Cambodia made a deal that Cambodia would start, would basically take out a loan from the American government to buy American food products, while the USA bombed and devastated all the farmland of Cambodia, and just bombed and destroyed it during the Vietnam War. So after the Vietnam War was over, and Cambodia was just devastated economically. I mean, everything was falling apart. And there were two wings of the Cambodian Communist Party. There was one wing of the Cambodian Communist Party that was the Marxist-Leninist wing. And there was another wing of the Cambodian Communist Party that were nut jobs. They were crazy, ultra-left, anarchist nut jobs led by Pol Pot. The crazy nut jobs, the Pol Potists took over the Communist Party of Cambodia. And they began slaughtering and executing the legit communists. All right, DBRK. All right, wrote that down. Began slaughtering the Marxist-Leninist pro-Soviet wing of their own party. Plus, they then attacked Vietnam. They went over the border and they attacked Vietnam and slaughtered some villages and committed some atrocities. So Vietnam was forced to intervene in Cambodia. And that was what they call the Kampuchea War, because when Pol Pot took over Cambodia, he changed the name of the country to what he called Democratic Kampuchea. That was the name of Pol Pot's regime. It was an ugly war, and eventually China invaded Vietnam, supposedly to protect Pol Pot. And after that happened, you had the Kampuchea War. Now we know that Pol Pot was being funded and backed by the United States. He was calling himself a communist, but he was actually an agent of American intelligence. The U.S. government was arming and backing Pol Pot. So, again, this was the use of proxy forces. So, Jimmy Carter is remembered as the peace president. He's the peace president. That's how we remember Jimmy Carter. But in reality, Jimmy Carter started 3 wars. But in all of those wars, he was able to make other countries look like the aggressors, right? The USA told Saddam Hussein to invade Iran, but said, oh, look, Iraq, the Ba'ath Socialist, is being an aggressor. The USA told Pol Pot to attack Vietnam and to slaughter the Marxist-Leninist wing of his own party. But they said, oh, look, it's them who's being the aggressor. The United States forced a situation where the Soviet Union had to send its troops into Afghanistan. But they said, oh, look, the Soviets are being aggressive. And a similar thing happened in Nicaragua. Right? In 1979, you had a revolution. The Sandinistas came in. So Jimmy Carter started arming former members of the Nicaraguan military and people involved in the drug trade and terrorists to start bombing the harbors and waging war against the socialist government of Nicaragua. So all over the world, you had this, Jimmy Carter, the peace president, he's retreating while escalating these proxy wars. And playing up that the Soviets are the real aggressors. Look, the Soviets, and the Soviet Union, the communists are the real aggressors. And this is what Joe Biden is doing right now. Joe Biden is making a big show out of pulling the troops out of Afghanistan, right? Except they're not back yet, right? They're supposed to start. They haven't even started yet. May 1st, they were supposed to be gone under the deal. Now they'll start leaving on May 1st. And supposedly, starting on May 1st, by September 11th, all U.S. troops will be out of Afghanistan. But, and it's a pretty big but, all the U.S. military contractors are going to still be in Afghanistan. And all the CIA forces will still be in Afghanistan. Workers' Party of Belgium. All the CIA forces will remain in Afghanistan. Plus the program that the USA has of arming various forces, Biden has made a big show of the fact that, he's pulling these forces out of Afghanistan. It's much like the Carter presidency, where he's saying, oh, look, I'm humble. We made mistakes. Oh, boy, I do declare our previous administration was crazy. But look, we want peace. We want peace. Plus, he's got that same tired look that Jimmy Carter had. Plus, he made a big. It was I almost wonder if it was staged. Okay, I have to ask that question. We have no way of knowing. But when Joe Biden had his trip and fall when he's coming down from the airplane, again, this is the game they play, and that my feeling is that that while Biden is withdrawing U.S. troops, not U.S. forces, but U.S. troops from Afghanistan, and making such a big show out of that, at the same time, he's escalating the conflict in Ukraine. He's escalating the conflict in Syria. He is escalating the conflict, in the South China Sea. But he's doing it in a way that he can make it look like China and Russia and Iran and other countries are the aggressors, right? That's the strategy. That is from this, this Brzezinski playbook. And it's a CIA strategy. And it's going to make the Pentagon mad because the Pentagon wants to sell lots of weapons. They want to have big confrontations and escalate, the arms race throughout the world. Trump had that, Arab NATO where he's selling missiles and weapons all over the Middle East. Why did China and Vietnam still have a bad relationship? China and Vietnam. So that's what's going on here, right? Is that the idea is that the United States will look like it is being passive, it's being surrendering while escalating conflicts and creating a situation where they can accuse Russia of being aggressive in Ukraine, accuse China of being aggressive in the South China Sea, and accuse Iran of being aggressive, accuse Syria of being aggressive. That's what they're trying to do, right? They're trying to create a situation where they can make the other country look like the aggressor. And this is part of the more effective evil, right? I mean, people say the Democrats are the lesser of two evils. Well, Black Agenda Report, those folks, they have long argued that actually, they're not the lesser of two evils. They're the more effective evil, especially when it comes to international tensions. Only Barack Obama could have invaded Libya. Bush would never have gotten away with it. Trump would never have gotten away with it. Took Barack Obama, the first black president, already on the list, Gleb, already on the list. Took Barack Obama, the first black president, to overthrow the government of Libya, right? That the more effective evil is often, the way the Democrats operate. They represent the more strategic side of the U.S. deep state. They don't represent the side that just wants to make profits in the short term. Rather, they represent the more managerial side of American influence and the American imperialists, right? The strategic folks, right? The Council on Foreign Relations is very much a descendant of the Round Table Group. And the Round Table Group was established by Cecil Rhodes. You ever heard of, Rhodesia? Zimbabwe, the African country of Zimbabwe, used to be called Rhodesia. And it was named after Cecil Rhodes. Cecil Rhodes was a British colonizer of Africa. Cecil Rhodes. And Cecil Rhodes is very famous for saying that imperialism was a way to prevent class struggle and civil war in Britain. If we want to avoid a civil war, we must become imperialists, right? It was about taking British workers who, as unemployment was rising, taking British workers and sending them across the developing world to become overseers and bosses and settlers and plantation owners in the developing world, that it was a way to avoid class struggle in the homeland. Lenin quotes Cecil Rhodes in his book, Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism. And Cecil Rhodes, when he died, he set up his estate. His estate set up something called the Round Table. And the Round Table, or the Round Table Group, was a think tank. It was a think tank set up by all the millions and millions of dollars Cecil Rhodes had gotten, Foster, all right. All the millions and millions of dollars Cecil Rhodes had gotten from plundering Africa and plundering the world, he set up in his estate and it's actually quite interesting. He called for the creation of a secret society to promote the interests of the British Empire. Now, when you think secret society, you think like decoder rings and like passwords and the Illuminati. It wasn't like that. It was basically a think tank. You got a think tank that came out of Cecil Rhodes' estate. It was called the Round Table Group. And eventually the Round Table Group You had the Rockefeller family, the richest family in the United States. That's, John D. Rockefeller, the founder of Standard Oil. Eventually, they got involved with it, and it moved to New York City. And now we have what's called the New York Council on Foreign Relations, which is now just the Council on Foreign Relations, CFR. It's a direct descendant of Cecil Rhodes' Round Table Group. It's got Rockefeller money in there. It's got the Ford Foundation in there. It's got, old British money and, the Rhodes Scholar programs. All right, Masonry, we'll talk about that. It's got all of that in there. And all of that is, very much, very, very much, very, very much, it's about strategic U.S. power. It's about maneuvering and manipulating the world gradually to work in the interest of the United States, but to stay stable. And those forces, what you can call the Eastern establishment, have long been at odds with the lower level capitalists and the military industrial complex that just want to make money, right? And that, the Council on Foreign Relations, a couple of years back, 5-6 years ago, they came out with a whole issue of their magazine called The Social Democratic Future of America, basically arguing the USA needed to develop more of a welfare state to be stable because of the danger of things like Donald Trump and other kinds of things. So, this is the difference in U.S. power, and Biden represents that Council on Foreign Relations wing, and that's who brought us Zbigniew Brzezinski, that's who brought us Henry Kissinger, that's who brought us the Trilateral Commission. This is the more strategic wing of U.S. power, the ultra-rich. And I've talked a lot about this, the divide in the American ruling class, right? There's a very good book called The Yankee and Cowboy War, written by Carl Oglesby. And the book talks about how, there is this Eastern establishment of New England old money, tied in with Britain, this strategic wing of American imperialism. And there is the cowboys, right? People like Howard Hughes, military manufacturers, folks that are not part of that elite club that just want to make money. In that book, they talk about Howard Hughes and his relationship with Richard Nixon. But nowadays you can talk about the fracking companies, right? And how they're at odds with the American elite. And, even though they're members of the capitalist class, millionaires and billionaires, they're still not part of the club. They're not for this strategic way of doing things. There you go. Thoughts on criticism of Chinese projects in Africa. All right. Okay. Criticism. Projects in Africa. Great. Wrote it down. Very, very good question. So that's important to keep in mind as well. Now, it's interesting because, so last live we got this crazy raid from a bunch of libertarians. And, I actually, in that live, I made a case against libertarianism. I used the live to basically just try and talk some sense as libertarians were going crazy in the chat. I hope some of those libertarians are still around. A lot of them subscribed, and thank you, Andre. Fire alarm gods. Thank you, humble height Henry. That conversation, I hope some of those libertarians are still around. I'll just be honest. Because today I want to talk about the appeal of libertarianism. The last live, amid all the chaos, I made a standard case against libertarianism. Tonight, I am going to talk about libertarianism's appeal and what those of us who are socialists can learn from the appeal of libertarianism. For example, one thing that I am frequently accused of is talking like a libertarian. This comes up a lot. A lot of times, people who've never seen my content, but have watched, BreadTube, have watched Skippy the Bear and Jabba the Vosh, Jabba the Vosh sits there, someone's racist, someone's sexist, Karl Marx wasn't a statist, motherfucker, shit, douchebag, he sits there cursing and calling people racist and sexist, and, if that's what you think a socialist is, right? Or what is it? You watch Destiny, and he's sitting there and he's like playing his video games, you know, motherfucker, stupid. Yeah, well, tell me exactly how many French fries you're gonna have at the socialist restaurant. You know, what do you mean you can't tell me exactly how many French fries I'll get in the socialist restaurant? You know, I mean, he's sitting there. What the fuck, dude? Yeah, I mean, he's sitting there playing video games, cursing, and asking you for like complicated, like computer designed blueprints for the future world. All right. You know, who else do you have on BreadTube, right? You got H. Bomber Guy. You got H. Bomber Guy. I'm H. Bomber Guy. I'm going to tell you in exactly so many words why anyone who says anything that could be considered a conspiracy theory is actually a racist, sexist douche. You know, and you should not listen to anyone who questions the mainstream narrative because they are indeed a racist, sexist, homophobe, and spreading racist lies and conspiracy theories. You know, that said, we should all vote for Jeremy Corbyn, and AOC is my best pal. You know, and so you got that. What else do you have on BreadTube? You know, well, I don't know. I mean, I could do a couple others, but, you know, I don't have time, right? You know, right? Natalie Wynn is telling us that, you know, if someone says they're not a fascist, it means they're a fascist, right? Because, you know, right? I mean, I could have fun with this. I'm writing a book about BreadTube now, so I've had to sit through a lot of this as I do my research, and so having a good time with it. SM lying on China. But anyway, like we could do that, right? But if you just tune into me, right? So I'm on here. A lot of times I'm doing it from work, so I'm wearing a suit, right? I'm wearing a suit because I'm doing it from work. Sometimes I even wear a suit at home because I want to look professional. But so I'm doing it from, you know, I'm wearing a suit, and I tend to like talk about, God forbid, economic data. You know, when you're talking about economics, good night, right? I'm sitting there talking about economics and why socialism is better than capitalism according to like economic arguments, which no one does apparently, right? It's like off limits. You're not supposed to do that. You know, and so I do that. You know, I believe in growth. I don't believe that growth is bad. I'm not dripping with pessimism and hopelessness. I don't focus on ID poll and calling people racist, sexist, and homophobic. And I do talk about the prison industrial complex and the rising police state. But I talk about why it's happening. I give an analysis. You know, I don't just like moralize it. I give an analysis of these things. So a lot of people hear me talk and they think I'm a libertarian, right? They think that I'm, you know, they think this guy's a libertarian. Well, my views, my belief that we need a government of action that fights for working families, that is not a libertarian belief system whatsoever, right? I mean, libertarians want government hands off, right? But, you know, people hear that I'm wearing a suit. I try to give optimism on these lives. I'm not trying to fill you up with pessimism. I'm citing economic data and all of this. People think I'm a libertarian. That's interesting, isn't it? Now, so what is it about libertarians that is appealing? What is it appealing about libertarians? Well, number one, I think that libertarianism is largely based on this belief. You know, a lot of people who are young, right? And this is actually, it's not a criticism of young people at all. This is actually a praise of young people. You know, when you're young, you think you're bulletproof. You think you're bulletproof, and you think you are Superman, right? A lot of people, you know, when they're in their early 20s, when they're in the late teens, they have like kind of an overblown sense of their own capabilities, right? It's true, right? You know, I mean, look, I mean, the older I've gotten, I've realized what I am capable of, but I've also come to realize much more what I'm not capable of. And actually, this is the whole story of human life, right? You know, a little baby tends to believe it's the most powerful person or thing in the world, right? You know, a little baby, it cries, and immediately its mother runs to it and feeds it, right? Or changes its diaper, and a little baby thinks, wow, I am the most powerful entity in the world. And the harsh reality is as the baby starts walking, it pretty soon realizes it is not the most powerful person in the world, right? And that as you grow up in life, you're gradually starting to realize how unpowerful you are and how little of an impact you have, right? And that, you know, as you go through school, as eventually you get into adulthood, pretty soon you realize that more and more, and I mean, this has been my experience, right? That in adulthood, you realize so much that, yes, I mean, you can achieve big things, you can do things, but at the end of the day, you know, the world is a giant, giant ocean. and you are just one fish in that giant ocean, and you may be bigger than some other fish, but there are other fish that are bigger than you, and even no matter how big you get, it's still a giant ocean, right? But when you're 20 and 18, you don't feel that way, right? And especially if you're young and you want to go into business. A lot of these young people really do believe that, hey, I am going to go out into the private sector and I am going to become a billionaire. I am going to become the next Donald Trump, and no one's going to get in my way, and I am going to go out and achieve my dreams. And they haven't had the harsh experience of realizing how unfair the world is and how rigged it is, and how the best way to do well in business, in private business, is to already be doing well. And the best way to already be doing well is to already have been doing well on top of that. They really do have this illusion, this overblown sense of their own abilities. They believe that they can come out of college at some crappy business school, right, with a ton of student debt, and they are going to open 2 or 3 little hot dog stands, but they're going to be the best hot dog stands ever, and pretty soon it'll be 12 hot dog stands, and then it'll be 42 hot dog stands, and pretty soon everyone in the world will be eating their hot dog, and they'll be, giving business seminars, and no, I mean, it doesn't work that way, right? And that, they talk about how a lot of what people do in the business sector, they spend the first 5 years of their life in the business world unlearning everything that they learned in business school, right? Because the actual reality of the private sector is completely different than what they learn in business school. And I'm not even talking about economics. Academic economics is a different field, but in business school, people who study business, they're not studying economics. Economics is a field of understanding the unemployment rates and understanding what causes growth, etc., right? That's academics. You're going to play your impressions of me at your wedding. But anyway, you can do whatever you want, Arthur. I won't stop you. But when it comes to business, you're just learning about how to run a business. And business, explicitly, business schools, that's where you get this academic stuff. That's where you get, this free market libertarianism, right? Somebody on my wall the other day said, I cannot get over this. A libertarian said there would be no monopolies if it weren't for the government. There would be no monopolies if it weren't for the government. I mean, that is like the dumbest. I mean, anyone who knows anything about economics, okay, first of all, what do you have to do as a business in order to stay in business? Expand. Right? The law of the market is expand or die. So if at some point your business stops expanding, you go out of business. Marx called this the general law of capitalist accumulation. The idea that the capitalist must constantly be accumulating in order to reinvest and expand. In order to accumulate, in order to reinvest and expand, he must get more profits, invest those profits, get more profits, invest those profits, and that what this naturally leads to is some people go out of business and some don't, right? And capital tends to centralize. Plus, there are all kinds of laws that we have on the books to prevent practices that lead to monopolism. For example, it is illegal for anyone who owns one of the Hollywood studios to own movie theaters. Did you know that? If you own a Hollywood studio, you cannot own a movie theater. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that is? Easy. Because if you owned a movie theater and you owned a Hollywood studio, you would only show your movies at the movie theater. And then there would not be fair competition. You'd have a monopoly. The movie theater and the movie studios would be owned by the same people. So we have to have government laws, and capitalists themselves like these laws. You have to have laws that movie theater owners cannot be the same as movie studio owners. Libertarianism is a capitalist ideology that's destructive for working families. Absolutely, David. Let me write it down. It's something that capitalists themselves want, right? That forget about the working class now. Just think about this from a purely capitalist perspective, right? If you're in the movie business and the movie theaters are owned by the movie studio, pretty soon, you're going to be showing only the movies of of your studio at your movie theater, and it's going to lead to what's called monopolistic stagnation. It's called monopolistic stagnation. Another example, right? If you are a big agribusiness company, you're not allowed to own grocery stores. Why? Because you would only have your food product at the grocery store. So there's all kinds of capitalist laws that are invented to prevent monopolism, right? Because, again, it used to be like this, right? Another classic thing. You have to pay people in money. This has been a big deal. Playing video game isn't the same as streaming. All right, video games versus streaming. This is a big deal, right? You have to pay people in money. Now, I mean, that might seem like common sense, but according to libertarians, hey, if you don't like it, just don't take the job, right? If you don't like it, just get another job. Well, it used to be that companies would pay workers in script. You ever heard of this? This is a common trick that the capitalists used to do, right? They used to say, hey, we don't want to have to, compete, and we own, the mining company. They had mining towns. The mining town, the mining company would also own the local store. And so instead of paying the workers in money, they would pay them in script, right? Pieces of paper that are only used at the company store, right? That way, they have a monopoly. And that way, the company store can charge whatever the hell it wants, because the worker can only spend his script at the company store. That's a monopoly. That's an unfair monopoly. Employers are not allowed to pay in anything but money, because if you pay in something other than money, you can then prevent people from spending it in different places. So that's illegal, right? That's a monopoly that would exist if it weren't for every capitalist wants a monopoly. If you have a monopoly as a capitalist, you get all of the profits. Capitalists want monopolies. Amazon bucks. There we go. Capitalists want monopolies, naturally. And so there are all kinds of laws in place to prevent capitalists from having monopolies. And the reason that a monopoly is bad, right? It's bad for workers, because, there's only one employer, there's only one, there you go. Thank you, Many. Thank you, Many Dog. But at the same time, when you have a monopoly, you have what's called monopolistic stagnation. Which means that, the monopoly gets wealthier, but the rest of the economy all around it gets poorer and poorer and poorer. And the actual rate of growth significantly declines. Monopolistic stagnation is the result of having a monopoly, right? That the whole economy starts to shut down, right? And that's why you had the trusts, right? This is very famous. In the 1900s, they passed all kinds of laws, and those laws weren't necessarily even passed for the good of the workers. They were just passed to save capitalism, right? In the 1890s, 1870s, we used to have a panic on the stock market every couple years, and there'd be mass unemployment, people starving in the streets, banks would fail and collapse. None of that's ever supposed to happen. It's all, it's not supposed to happen according to libertarians. Well, it happened. It happened because of the fact that capitalism naturally leads to monopolies, and the state is used to try and prevent that, right? I used to work in the insurance business. I never became an insurance salesman. I never had an insurance sales license, but I would help set up meetings for, insurance people, and, I was involved in, marketing. I could never actually sell insurance because I don't have a license, but, I learned some of the rules in the insurance business, right? Here's a rule in the insurance business, for example, right? If you are an insurance salesman, right? An insurance salesman sells an insurance policy, and then he gets, a cut, right? He gets his, his commission, it's called, his cut of the sale. One thing that is extremely illegal is that it's called rebating, right? If an insurance salesperson goes to you and says, hey, if you buy the insurance from me, I'll give you some of the money back. That's illegal. Why? Because that would lead to a monopoly, right? Because think about it. If some insurance person comes up to you and says, hey, if you buy insurance from me, I'll give some of it back to you. That's illegal. That is illegal. Socialist monopolies. That's illegal. It's called rebating, right? Because it creates a monopoly. And having quote unquote fair competition is something that the state is always doing on behalf of capitalists. The capitalist state is always stepping in to implement measures because naturally capitalists do their best to try and set up monopolies, right? So, okay, I mean that's an argument, not a question. So there you go. It is illegal to rebate. It is illegal. It is illegal to own a movie studio and own a movie theater. It is illegal to, 16 tons. I owe my soul to the company store. It's illegal to pay your employees with anything but actual money. These things are not allowed. Capitalists naturally do them, and the government stops them to try and, not because it cares about workers, but because it's just trying to make capitalism work. And so when this person says on their line, they sit there and they say, oh, there would be no monopolies without the government. That's absolutely ridiculous. That's absolutely ridiculous. That's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, it's like, some things are true and some things are not. But it's like these people don't understand how capitalism works, right? If you didn't have that law, you did not have that law that movie studios and movie theaters could not be owned by the same companies, you can bet that Warner Brothers would set up movie theaters all across the country that would only show Warner Brothers movies, right? And that would be bad for the economy. You can bet that if they did not have that law that you have to pay employees in actual money, Jeff Bezos would start paying everyone in Amazon bucks. And then all of his employees could only shop at Amazon. You can bet he would try that, but for the good of capitalism, they don't do that. Right? I mean, there are many, many examples of this, that capitalism naturally leads to the creation of monopolies. Monopolies lead to monopolistic stagnation and an economic crash. And so the capitalist state has been, since the beginning of capitalism, the capitalist state has been trying to prevent the natural development of monopolies in order to keep the capitalist economy working. So this notion that there would be no monopolies without the government, it's complete and utter delusion. It is complete and utter delusion. I mean, some things are true and some things are not, and it's beyond me how people can believe this. But at the end of the day, libertarianism very much appeals to that desire for growth, that optimism, that belief in yourself, that young person's, I'm going to go out there and achieve my dreams. I'm going to go out there and work hard, and the government's not going to get in my way. And that's a good sentiment, right? That's growth, that's optimism. And when socialism is represented by pessimism, it's represented by identity politics and this, circular firing squad and, and this negativity, I can see the appeal there. The fact that libertarians talk about economic data and socialists generally shun economic data. That is certainly an appeal of libertarianism. So, I have argued that there are two ideological cancers facing the United States right now. Libertarianism on the right and social synthetic leftism on the left, right? And the pessimistic, destructive ideology, right? The spiritual descendants of Leon Trotsky, right? A lot of them don't like Trotsky, but Trotskyism, the soul of Trotskyism, right? And the soul of Ayn Rand, I guess, the Austrian school and the Trotskyite school. Those are the two enemies facing America's working people. But at the end of the day, they both appeal to the same sentiments. Libertarianism emphasizes economic liberalism, right? Individualism, the notion that the economy should just be left up to itself. The state should not intervene in the economy. Everyone on their own, every man for himself in economics. And the Trotskyites, the synthetic left, they appeal to social liberalism, the desire to tear things down, desire to break down community obligation and values and a sense of loyalty and, isolate people from each other, the destructiveness, the destructive impulse, the desire to rebel. It's these sentiments, right? It is liberalism. Liberalism is the ideology that dominates the Western world. Liberalism says individualism above all else. That is what liberalism teaches. individualism above all else, and it works against the very nature of human beings. Human beings are collective creatures in their very nature. Every building in the New York City skyline was built by thousands of workers, worked together to build it, right? I mean, there is nothing in the world today that anyone can point to and say, I made that all by myself. Nothing. Not a single product in any store that anyone can point to and say, this was made by John. This was made by Jessica. Right? No, it was made by thousands of Johns and thousands of Jessicas and thousands of Steves and Bobs and, I mean, every product in every store is the result of the collective labor of thousands and thousands of people. Human beings cooperate to build things, right? Someone says, well, what about a wood carver, right? I know a guy who's a wood carver. This guy's a wood carver, and he carves these beautiful wood carvings all by himself, and he sells them at craft shows, so he can say he made that all by himself. But can he? I bet you, your friend Steve or Joe or Bob the wood carver, I bet he uses tools for his wood carving, does he not? And those tools, did he make those tools himself? Did he make his very expensive wood carving knife? Did he make his No! Those tools were made by thousands of people. And those tools that enabled him to carry out his individual craft as an individual wood carver are the product of collective labor. So there you go. Yes, there is nothing in this world, nothing, that is not the product of the collective labor of thousands of people. Human beings working together. I am speaking to you now via an iPhone. And there are probably thousands of human beings who collectively created this iPhone. The problem is, right, human beings are collective creatures. We're working together on a grand scale and coordination. But while we work together collectively, and while production is collectively carried out, the proceeds from production are privately accumulated. And that is a contradiction, right? If the capitalists were making the iPhones all by themselves and then making profits from them all by themselves, that would make sense. But there is now a contradiction. This is what Marx wrote about. The contradiction between collective production and private accumulation. The product is produced collectively, but the profits from the product are accumulated individually. An individual owner who has a sheet of paper that says, I am the owner, profits from it. And because he is the individual owner, the collective effort to produce is not done for the benefit of the collective. It is done for the benefit of the individual private owner, right? If he says this factory is making weapons, it makes weapons. If he says this factory is making Band-Aids, it's making Band-Aids. He says if this factory is making shoes, it's making shoes. All the people might collectively work there. But the decision about what gets produced and the profits from what is produced is privately accumulated. This is the contradiction of capitalist society. We have a collective, productive economy. However, the direction of it and the profits from it are individually carried out. And this leads to the anarchy of production, the falling rate of profit. The capitalist is constantly driving the worker to produce as hard as he can, produce more. He wants to replace the worker with machines. He wants to, he wants to eliminate workers from production, make workers more easily replaceable, de-skill the jobs, drive the wages down. And at the same time that he's doing that, he wants to produce as many products as he possibly can. And he makes production more and more efficient, right? The capitalist cannot exist without constantly revolutionizing the means of production. And as he does that, the pay that he gives to the worker is less and less and less. And pretty soon, you have a market that is glutted with products that cannot be sold. The wages the worker gets paid is never enough to buy back the product he produces. The worker can never buy what he consumes, and the market is always going to be glutted with products that cannot be sold. And the capitalist is constantly trying to resolve this contradiction. How do you deal with the fact that the capitalist always makes more than what he can sell? There is no way that the capitalist can only produce what the worker can buy back, because then there are no profits. right? The worker can never buy back what he produces, and that this is the built-in destructive mechanism of the capitalist system. This is economics. I haven't called anybody racist. I haven't called anybody sexist. I'm just explaining the nature of the capitalist economy. And all right, Derek Chauvin, I guess I'll have to call somebody racist, but there you go. But no. But seriously, this is the nature of the capitalist economy. And it has built-in cyclical crises, right? It doesn't work. And the solution is to have a system where the banks, factories, and major industries, the centers of economic power, are organized to serve the people, right? You need collective control over the economy. Society as a whole must take control of the means of production. You need an economy that is centrally planned. And that is how China became a global superpower. And that's how Russia became a country that was strong enough to defeat the Nazis, to fully industrialize, to get into outer space, right? Special ideas, risk. All right. Risk in capitalism, right? This central planning of the economy, this is what has resulted in, China and Russia becoming superpowers, Cuba being known all over the world for its economic achievements, right? This is a big game changer. When the economy is organized to serve public good and not profits, you can get beyond the irrationality of the capitalist system. I have said many times that we need a government of action to fight for working families. A government of action to fight for working families. That transition to socialism in the United States would include four things. Step number one would be a vast program of reconstruction. The state should hire the unemployed and put them to work rebuilding the country, building new bridges, new highways, new high-speed railway, new schools, new universities, right? Just, redoing the country, new power plants, new water treatment facilities. We should hire the unemployed, bring the troops home from around the world, hire the unemployed, put them to work rebuilding this country, reinventing this country. This country needs a high-tech makeover. The whole country needs an update, employing eminent domain, right? This country needs a high-tech update. Step number two, in order to pay for it, America's oil, America's natural gas, America's coal, America's timber, all of America's natural resources should become public property, right? Every American, I believe, has just as much right to the profits from Gaddafi Center. Every American has just as much right to the profits from our natural resources. All right. Paris Commune. Just as much right to it as anybody else, right? And the profits from our oil and our natural gas and our coal and our timber should go into the public budget so they can pay for the vast, reconstruction of the country. Step number three would be public control of banking. The lending of money and the assigning of credit should be done centrally. There should be a state plan for organizing the economy, and the state should provide the lending of money. No private banks, right? The lending of money should be done, by the state. And the state should, hey, if you want a house, a mortgage loan, you get it from the government. And the interest from your loan goes back into the state budget, right? If you want to start a business, you make the case to your community on a local level or a state level or a national level that your business will benefit the community. And the community will determine, right, whether or not you get the credit to start your business, right? A state monopoly on the lending of money so that credit can be assigned based on what is in the interest of the country overall, not based on what is in the short-term interest of a capitalist in order to make profits. The lending of money will be a decision made democratically for public good, that there will be central planners assigning the credit. And the fourth step would be the enactment of an economic bill of rights, the right to a job, the right to housing, right, the right to education, right? These things that Roosevelt proposed, the Economic Bill of Rights, in his last State of the Union, he proposed an Economic Bill of Rights. These things would be enacted. And if you had those four steps, You had a national program of reconstruction. You had public control of natural gas and oil and all of our natural resources. You had third, you had a state control of lending of money and monopoly and state monopoly on credit. Fourth, if you enacted an economic bill of rights, at that point the United States would be transitioning towards socialism. We wouldn't fully be there yet, but any government that was able to carry that out would have to have pushed back capitalist power so far that socialism would be just on the horizon, right? That's a transitional program to enact socialism. Those four steps would basically result in the pushing back of so much capitalist power that we would have a working class government. Folks, we need a government of action to fight for working families. It is not the government. It is not the private sector that brought us the music of Bach and Beethoven. It's not the private sector that brought us the works of William Shakespeare. It's not the private sector that got us the Sistine Chapel, right? Got us the brilliance of Leonardo da Vinci. No, right? History generally is pushed forward when you have a government, a state, that is working to stimulate the creativity of the population, to drive the population to be more industrious, to make the people more creative, to make a better life for the population, promoting scientific research, promoting the arts. When you have a state that is leading the society, not just sitting back and protecting private property, as libertarians would prefer, but rather you have a state that is driving forward human innovation, that's when great achievements take place, right? When you have a state that is driving forward humanity. I've often made the analogy, and I'll make it again, right, that, if a child doesn't have proper food, if a child doesn't have proper clothing in the winter, the parent can be arrested. Why? They are arrested for criminal neglect because they have not fulfilled their responsibility. They've not fulfilled their responsibility. Right? Their obligation is to care for that child, and they have not fulfilled it. And I argue that the government of the United States is guilty of criminal neglect. Look outside. Crumbling roads, crumbling infrastructure, lack of health care on the part of our population amid a pandemic. The government of the United States is guilty of criminal neglect. It has failed. It is in dereliction of duty. And now is the time for a government of action that fights for working people and average Americans to take charge and force the economy to once again work in the interests of average people, to start rebuilding America, to make your community and your life better, to build a better future for your family, to provide a decent life and security for the elderly folks, to provide an optimistic promise and future for the young folks. That is the duty of the state. We need statecraft once again in the United States of America. That is my position, and that is what I would argue socialism in the United States should put forward. Not tearing things down, not burning things, not unleashing people's destructive impulses, but rather an optimistic vision of building community and pushing back the power of greed, the destructive impulses that have been unleashed by a capitalist system in decline. That is my position. So I hope you all enjoyed my opening remarks. On that note, roll call. I'll call you out as I see you. Names and locations. Call you out as I see you. And then we'll do the super chat thing because, oh boy, we got a lot of super chats to get through, but that's good though. There you go. Rafael is in Brazil. Toronto, Philip Santos. That's a new name. Cole from Calgary. Massachusetts, Springfield, Missouri. Montreal, Cia, good friend of the program. Ryan in Oakland, good friend of the program. Johnny Socialism in Olympia. Detroit, David in Los Angeles. Keaton Mansfield, deep in the heart of Illinois. West Palm Beach, Alberta, Calgary, Los Angeles. Social justice with economic justice is liberalism. Azores Islands, Cincinnati, Ohio, Jenny Lynn. Brad in Cleveland. Tamara and Dario from Brooklyn, welcome. West Palm Beach, Wisconsin. Never mind. Mountains of Vermont, very good. West Palm Beach, Iceland. John in Albany, New York. Ithaca, New York. Oklahoma, where the wind comes right behind the rains. Annette is in Oklahoma. Great state. Great state. All right, San Francisco, Boyle Heights, Los Angeles, West Palm Beach, Cam from Tube. All right, Sticks' mom. Well, your mom too, Sticks. Steve Benton Harbor, Michigan. L.A., Los Angeles, California. Very, very, very good. Did you get your super chat about Destiny? I did. About Destiny? No, I don't think I got a super chat about Destiny. I did get a super chat about Richard Wolff, but there you go. We need critical thinking. Illinois. Charlotte from Nassau County, and shout out to you, Charlotte. We just had a great chat. That was great. Very good. San Gabriel in California. West Palm Beach. Space Communist in Florida. Espresso. Norman in Oakland. Andrew in Mankato, Minnesota. OP from the Treasure Coast of Florida. Joseph in Baltimore. Tony in the Oregon coast. Sean Hazley. Great opening remarks, says Frank in California. Thank you, Frank. Billings, Montana. Puerto Rico, says Diablo. All right. Morgan, Philly. Wisconsin. Santa Clarita. Very good. Moscow Mills, Missouri. Union County, New Jersey. Happy Valley, Oregon. You missed me. I didn't miss you this time, Daniel. Bendigo, Australia. David Fox, good friend of the program. Northern California. Hey, no more trolls today, says Kieran Fatima in Toronto. Yep, I guess we lucked out. Or did we? Troy in Paris of the Plains, Kansas City, Missouri. David in China. General Patton was born next door to me, says Eco Justice Warrior. The role of worker councils and popular councils in socialist America. Very good. Very, very good. Councils in socialist USA. Salt Lake City. Salt Lake City. Chris in Salt Lake City. Very, very good. Chris in Salt Lake City. Very, very good. Anybody else? Names and locations. American Futurist is in California. Very, very good. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome, American Futurist. Central Kentucky. There you go. Central Kentucky. Solidarity from Florida. Harold Sullivan. Shout out to you, Harold Sullivan. You're a longtime friend of the program. Nate in Chicago. Isaac in Northern California. Very good. Kolkata, India. Oh, there you go. Very good. Omaha, Nebraska. Kendall in San Diego. Very, very, very good. Excellent. Anybody else? Names and locations. I will call you out as I see you. Then we'll start. Lexington, Kentucky. Ryan Overstreet. Welcome, Ryan. Longtime friend. Great guy. Northern Michigan. Very, very good. Populism for the win. We'll write that down. Populism. Excellent. Very, very good. Anyone else? Alabama, Justice A. Cleveland, Pirate Alex. Oh, there you go, Cleveland. I didn't see you till now, but I saw you now. Alex in New York. Kieran from San Diego. California Bay Area. Very good. Sticks looks like a weird guy. Yeah, it would have been fun to debate him, though. Homer in Tacoma, Washington. Homer in Nashville, Tennessee. Very, very good. Apparently he's famous for punking out of debates. He wouldn't debate the humanist. He wouldn't debate some other people. Robert from Hawaii. Good to hear from you, Robert. Anybody else? Daniel in Seattle. Marty O, talking about Bob Dylan. I think you missed my super chat. I don't... What was your super chat? Is there a super chat I missed? Folks, repeat it. If I missed a super chat, just keep repeating it. Alrighty. Hello from Chicago, says Samuel. Well, hello to you. Hello to you, Samuel. Anybody else? Names and locations. I call you out as I see you. That's really good stuff. I call you out as I see you. All right. Okie dokie. I think that's everybody. Signs of Marx's ideology before Marx. All right. Signs of Marx ideology before Marx. All right. We got a lot of super chats, folks. So I am going to go through them. Some of them will be quicker than others. You know how that works. Did the CIA invent Pentecostalism? The CIA was not created until after the Second World War. Pentecostal Christianity has been in the United States since the 1800s. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that charismatic Christianity, right, which is what Pentecostalism is. Pentecostalism is a form of charismatic Christianity, originated during the Great Awakening. Now, the Great Awakening was in the 1840s and 50s, if I'm not mistaken, the Second Great Awakening. Right? The First Great Awakening was before the American Revolution. It was a feeling of mass religious revival. Jonathan Edwards and others, sinners in the hands of an angry God. That's the First Great Awakening. The Second Great Awakening, debate. I would love to debate David Pachman. That's easy. I would happily debate him. The Second Great Awakening was in the 1840s and 50s, and it was a widespread movement of religious revival and awakening. My ancestor, Charles G. Finney, who I am descended from, was one of the founders of the Second Great Awakening. He actually moved out to Ohio, and my family's from Ohio. He was the Second Great Awakening was a widespread religious movement in the United States that was opposed to slavery. What made the Second Great Awakening different from previous religious movements was that there was the tradition of what you call tent revivalism, where instead of having church indoors, they would have tents outside with the pastor screaming and yelling. That's where you get the tradition of the altar call. It's where you get, and Pentecostalism, or charismatic Christianity, comes from that tradition. A lot of times you'd have these preachers who would not read out their sermons, but they would instead, they would plan them, but they would do extemporaneously, and the atmosphere in the room, Jesus the first communist, the atmosphere in the room, would lead people to believe that God was in the room with them, and that's the charismatic feeling. That's what Pentecostalism is, right? It's the feeling that God is actually in the room while you're praying. Is that God kind of takes over the body of people when they are praying. That's speaking in tongues is a Pentecostal practice. Snake handling. Charismatic means spiritual gift and blessing. It's essentially, yes, and that it's charismatic Christianity refers to a practice in which people, while they are praying, believe they are taken over by the power of the Holy Spirit, and that they become somewhat possessed. I don't know about the Bronze Age. They become somewhat possessed. Okay, they believe a greater power takes them over. And that's charismatic religious practices. That's what that refers to. And Pentecostalism is probably the most famous, the most well-known form of charismatic Christianity. And no, the CIA did not invent it. Because the CIA wasn't started until after World War II, and this stuff has been in the United States for years. And look, charismatic practices have existed in every society. In Islam, there are such people. They call them Sufis. It's called Sufism. In Islam, there are Muslims who have charismatic practices, and they do the exact kind of things that Pentecostals do. They dance while they pray. They jump up and down, and they induce a trance state. That's Sufism. In Judaism, there are Jews who do this practice, and they are called, I believe, Kabbalah, right? Kabbalahism, right? And even going back to the Middle Ages, there were mystics, monks in Europe who practiced this, in their Christian practices. Persecution of religion. There are, the tradition of chanting, right? We all know about chanting, right? It's like, we go to protests. We want justice. We want justice. Well, that goes back to ancient India, right? In ancient India, people in India have been chanting mantras for thousands of years. For thousands of years, they've been meditating with mantras, Buddhists, Hindus have been doing these kind of practices, Confucianism, Taoism. So this is the human behavior. You get yourself into an altered state of conscious through chanting, through dancing, this is a thing people have done mainly for the purpose of group cohesion. You asked about, is charismatic Christianity invented by the CIA? Is Pentecostalism invented by the CIA? The answer is no. After the Second World War, when the CIA was new, there was an extensive study of this by not just the American CIA, but also British intelligence. William Sargent, who was a leading psychologist in Britain, he wrote a book called, what was it called? It was called The Mind Possessed, by William Sargent. And he went around the world studying African tribes and studying indigenous groups and studying tent revival Baptists in the United States, trying to figure out how this worked as part of like brainwashing research for the CIA. If you read about the search for the Manchurian candidate, if you read about Project MK Ultra, basically as the Cold War was beginning, the CIA was freaked out by Chinese communists, right? Because during the Korean War, thousands of American soldiers were captured by Chinese communists. Were captured by Chinese communists. And after they were captured, they converted to being communists, and they rejected Derek Chauvin, Fair Trial. They rejected American capitalism and imperialism, and that's the movie The Manchurian Candidate comes out of that. The brainwashing craze in U.S. society all comes out of that, because how could this be possible? Robert J. Lifton, who was an Air Force psychiatrist, he did all kinds of research on this, and it was something that the American government did extensive research on. So yeah, that's, I can see why you might think that when you ask, did the CIA invent Pentecostalism? The answer is no, but in the 1950s and 60s, the CIA did extensive research into the wider trend of religious experience and mysticism in order to try and fight communists. LSD. Look, there's a reason that LSD is available, right? LSD was invented by, I believe, a Swiss chemist by the name of Albert Hofmann. And Albert Hofmann, he was just this chemist, but the CIA discovered that there was this drug that could induce hallucinations. So the CIA started experimenting with it on college campuses and all of that. And eventually the CIA started giving it out to civilians, right? And Project MK Ultra. The reason that LSD started being used widely in U.S. society was because of the CIA. Sounds like a crazy conspiracy, but it's a fact. It is a fact that that LSD would not have become a popularly used recreational drug if it weren't for the CIA, pushing it and giving it to civilians and doing all kinds of crazy research on it. So there you go. And like Charles Manson was involved in, some CIA experiments, which may have been why he was released from jail after, you read the new book on Charles Manson. It's particularly disturbing. There's all kinds of stuff that went on with Project MK Ultra. Past 30 years. All right. First 40 of China. Past 30. All right. Okay. All right, so there we go. That was that first question. The Peruvian elections. Looks to me like this Free Peru movement is a movement that involves Marxist-Leninists, but it also involves more social democratic it's an eclectic movement, and it's exactly the kind of movement we need here, right? You look at this Free Peru movement, this Marxist, this revolutionary anti-capitalist movement that may very well become the ruling party in Peru. It is a movement that is socialist and Marxist, guided by people who've understood Marxism, but it's broad. It's not stuck in the past. It has figured out how to develop socialism with Peruvian characteristics. And, it's got a mass following. Look, the movement in Peru that's on the brink of taking power, the movement in Peru that... Okay. The movement in Peru that's on the brink of taking power, if it was called the Communist Party of Peru Marxist-Leninist, and it was running on a platform of turning Peru into a pure Enver Hoxha-style planned economy in line with the teachings of Enver Hoxha and Lenin and Stalin, it would not win. If the party in Peru that's on the brink of winning were called the Trotskyist Fourth Committee of the Revolutionary Workers' Republic of Peru, and it was about applying one specific interpretation, and it would not get through. The Peruvian communists have figured out a formula for building a mass anti-capitalist movement specifically engineered for Peru's circumstances. You guys are just pouring them in. new norm. And it worked, right? And it's working. And I mean, there's a very good chance it could work, and we need to learn from that. And also, the shining path. This is how long it has taken. They've had revolutionary anti-capitalist movements all over Latin America, right? Venezuela, Bolivia, but it took so long in Peru. Why? Because the shining path. The crazy Gonzalo Maoists. Bernie Madoff died. Okay. I don't know what you want me to say about that, Texan White Panther. The crazy Gonzalo Maoists who cut people's heads off and hung dogs and bombed the Chinese embassy. They did so much damage to leftism. They were so bloodthirsty and violent that it's taken this long for the left in Peru to get itself together. The shining path is not good, okay? And I mean, the left in Peru has taken this long to get itself together. Pride in your work when exploited. Okay, pride in work when exploited. All right. We got a lot of super chats here, so I'm just going to start banging them out. All right. Is entropy a universal truth? I don't know. I am not a physicist, right? I do know, and you should know this, okay? And we don't realize this in the United States, but around the world, there are many Marxists who reject the new physics. They reject Einstein's physics, okay? There's a book called The Big Bang Never Happened, written by Dr. Eric Lerner, that's widely studied in the Marxist movement. He's the head of the Fusion Energy Research Division of New Jersey. He maintains that entropy, the Big Bang, that this is not real physics. And there are a lot of Marxists who agree with that around the world. Now, you wouldn't know that, but in India, in Africa, in China, in the former Soviet Union, there are a lot of Marxists who are physicists. There is a whole wing of Marxists who reject Einsteinian physics, okay? And argue that entropy is not legit. I have no clue about that. I know nothing about physics. I think I took physics in college and I flunked it. I do not know anything about physics, okay? But, I don't. So you're asking me, is entropy a universal truth? I don't know. I have no clue. But you should know that there are some Marxists who maintain it is not. Okay, that the second law of thermodynamics is not legitimate. Now, I don't know enough about it, honestly. I mean, I am not a science guy, especially not a physics guy, so I just have no clue. So that's all I can say. I did read, there's a friend of mine, we don't agree with each other politically. There's a friend of mine who used to be in the Workers' World Party, a guy named Mike Gimbel, who was a mathematical genius, who was like a sports statistician for the New York Knicks and was like a high-achieving sports statistician. And he wrote a book. I mean, he maintains this. He wrote a book called Dialectical Materialism versus the New Physics. He is adamant that entropy is not universal. I just don't know enough about it. I've read what these people have said, and I mean, all I can say is they seem to be very confident in their position. But I'm very sure, you can go check out Mike Gimbel's videos on this, but I'm sure that there are people that watch those videos that know a lot about physics and say he's completely wrong. And I've heard those people. I've seen people get physically angry at this critique of physics. I've seen people just start punching walls and get furious that insist that no, the new physics is correct and that these people are quacks. So I have no clue, and I don't take a position on it, and I shouldn't because I don't know, right? I just don't know, right? My bias would be toward Einsteinian physics, right? But then again, these people are very, very confident in their positions, and there you go, right? And look, while I tend to believe what science says, right? I think climate change is a reality, etc. Science is, there's no lack of bias in science, okay? Look, Darwin's understanding of evolution was largely correct, right? Species do change over time, etc. But if you read Darwin's writings, he projects onto his own theories. Darwinism, right, does not, if you actually look at biology, there is no, beginning and end. You see that famous picture, that everyone's looked at of, the monkey, and it gradually turns into a person? You would think that, human beings are the pinnacle of evolution. All of life on Earth was gradually leading up to humans. That is not anywhere in biology. No, every biologist will tell you there is no end game to the process of evolution and change over time. There is no end game. There's no pinnacle, We're not getting better or getting worse, right? Oh my goodness. All right. And we're not getting better or getting worse, right? That it's just change over time based on natural selection, right? But yet, if you read Darwin's writings, Charles Darwin was a believer in historical progress, and he was a British Empire Atlanticist and a follower of Robert Malthus, the Malthusian. And even though he was pointing toward real biological processes, evolution, he projected onto it a whole lot of linear thinking, a whole lot of, assumptions about, the superiority of humans over animals, and, there you go. So, science, just like everything else, is impacted by the environment in which it is created. That doesn't mean that we should discredit the scientific process by any means. It just means that, there's going to be a bias, right? There's going to be a bias. During the Cold War, there was endless efforts by the Soviet Union and endless efforts by the United States to argue that the natural world somehow fit their political theories. Don't do that, right? Science is supposed to be independent of politics, but it never 100% becomes completely independent of politics, right? Art, science, the humanities, the world is very much impacted. These things are impacted by the world in which they're created, and you can't pretend that they aren't, right? And that's why it's very dangerous, I think, to start banning people from YouTube or something, because, look, I don't think the Earth is flat. The Earth is not flat. But, if you create an atmosphere where people are not allowed to say on YouTube that the Earth is flat, that leads to a problem. I think people should be able to say the Earth is flat, and other people should be able to debate those people and show why they're wrong, and we should all be able to get smarter in the process. Right? You learn through confrontation, through contradiction, the dialectic, right? The back and forth. At the rate we're going, we're never going to finish. All right. I need to start giving short answers. What stops you from being a social democrat? What reassures you that revolution is possible? Well, the main reason I'm not a social democrat is social democracy tends to be pro-imperialist, right? In the Western world, social democrats don't want to dismantle imperialism. They want to make imperialism work more effectively. That's, they want, that's the main thing is the social democrats of the West who want gradual change. They don't want to dismantle imperialism. They want gradual change to make imperialism more effective. And that's not the role I see myself playing. I do believe revolution is possible because we're heading toward a crisis, and only a change in how the economy functions, the natural, outcome of everything I talked about in the opening of the live, the falling rate of profit, etc., requires a change in how the means of production operate. You can't gradually change that. There needs to be an event horizon. There you go. All righty. Okay. Is World War III inevitable? No, not a direct, an all-out, World War III, a nuclear confrontation, definitely not inevitable. Proxy wars and kind of a prolonged confrontation between Eurasia and the Western, Atlanticist superpowers, yeah, that's already happening. But a direct all-out confrontation is definitely not inevitable. All right. Gorbachev selling off farms as co-ops. I've heard of that happening throughout the former USSR, and factories, like every worker had a share as they were privatized, and they would sell it off. They would get swindled out of them. There's many examples of that. Read about the fall of the Soviet Union. Are we better off with Democrats in? I would argue that I expect society will be more stable with the Democrats in. The government's actions will be more predictable, and there'll probably be less unrest to some degree or other. But at the same time, international relations, the USA will be operating in a much more manipulative way of maneuvering that will be much more effective at beating back Russia and China. But better? No. I wouldn't argue it's better. It's not worse, but it's not better. No, I mean, better, I don't... during the Cold War, there was kind of a feeling that the Democrats were, they were friendlier to the Soviets. But what that was really about was about manipulating the Soviets, right? And that was an illusion. It was liberals that largely brought down the Soviet Union, not Reagan. So there you go. No, I wouldn't say better. All right. Permanent revolution comes from Marx. Are we misreading Marx? Well, no, we're not, because the permanent revolution, right, which is the Trotskyist idea that you can't have socialism in developing countries because they're not fully capitalist yet. It really, really flies in the face of imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism, by Lenin. Lenin, in that book, makes clear that the revolutionary energy is going to be in the East, not in the West. And that Trotsky's theory of permanent revolution, originally he said that the Soviet Union shouldn't be a revolutionary dictatorship of the workers and peasants, but only a working class, majority, only a working class, dictatorship over the majority of the population that were peasants. No, absolutely not, right? I think in a lot of ways, Trotsky's theory of permanent revolution is an attempt to Lenin adjusted Marxism, right? He updated Marxism, and it's an attempt to try and hold on to the Eurocentric aspects of Marx, which Lenin repudiated. And that's going to be a big theme in an upcoming lecture I'm planning to give, actually. I'm going to be talking a lot about this, so there you go. Favorite communist poets. Pablo Neruda, great poet, was a communist, was an admirer of Stalin, from Chile, the Chilean poet of the Spanish language. Garcia Lorca, also a great communist poet. Who else? English language poetry. You probably have a lot of communists. A lot of people think Allen Ginsberg was a communist. I don't think he was. I think he was a counterculture figure, but he was, his poem America seems like it might be a communist poem, but it's not. And there's references to communism all throughout Allen Ginsberg's poetry, but he was largely a countercultural figure who was pretty hostile to communism, and he was also a pedo. So there you go. He was a pedophile, founder of NAMBLA. Yuck. So there you go. All right. Okay. Favorite communist rappers. Look, I've met Boots Riley. I've interviewed Boots Riley. My favorite Mutiny is one of my favorite rap songs of all time. That is an amazing piece of music. I also really like Dead Prez, the rapper Dead Prez. I mean, is he a communist or is it more kind of revolutionary black nationalism? I don't know, but he has that song Selling Dope, which is amazing. Selling Dope, I mean, it's about the CIA's involvement in drugs and it's amazing. And so I really like Dead Prez also. There you go. Okay. I do like Immortal Technique as well. He's pretty great. Rebel Diaz, that's some good stuff. So there you go. All right, what was the purpose of the secret speech? My argument is that the secret speech was largely directed at the West. It was an attempt to send a message to the West that they were willing to negotiate, and that Stalin had not been a good ally of the United States during the Cold War, and that what the West had alleged against Stalin was largely true, and that Stalin, was gone, and they were a new, reformed Soviet, Union that was willing to cooperate with the West and have détente. It was an attempt to get the U.S. threats against the Soviet Union to a bed. That was really the hope. The hope was that if they gave this speech and, ran Stalin's name through the mud, if they repudiated Stalin and his previous policies, the United States would sit down and negotiate with them and, not be as hostile and not escalate the arms race. And it largely worked. It actually worked. Throughout the early 60s, there was détente. Kennedy, and, he met with, the Soviet Union following the whole Cuban Missile Crisis. There was a period of détente. Right after the secret speech was delivered, 1956, the Communist Party published a pamphlet called Communists Take a New Look. And the Communist Party was very much trying to not look radical. They published Communists Take a New Look, and they offered to merge with the Socialist Party. And the de-Stalinization in the USSR was largely a belief that if the Soviets toned it down, and most especially if they told their allies in the developing world to tone it down, then the United States would de-escalate the arms race. That was the feeling. And it worked a little bit. China didn't go along with it. Mao was a third world revolutionary, and he wasn't going to go along with it. If we lost... All right. He wasn't going to go along with it. He wasn't going to go along with it. So, but, a lot of communist parties around the world did go along with Soviet direction and not engage in armed struggle and, have a more passive approach in dealing with the West. And because of that, there was some level of détente. But ultimately, about 1968 in Czechoslovakia, it became clear that the United States still wanted to destabilize the Soviet Union. So, around 68, 69, 1970, you have the rise of Brezhnev, and you have a new wave of revolutionary energy in the Soviet camp based on the fact that détente did not work, which is kind of interesting. It was like, so at first, Khrushchev's secret speech, the Soviets are like, oh, we're the good communists. We want to negotiate. It's the Chinese that are the crazy revolutionaries. But then China, they start having the Cultural Revolution. China's calling itself the center of global revolution. Revolution is the main trend in the world today. The Soviets are trying to negotiate with the West and all of that. But then, right, Czechoslovakia, the USA, stages the overthrow of the government and the rise of Dubček, and the Soviets are forced to send their military to Prague, and there's a whole situation. So in about 1969, 1970, they switch, right? And suddenly the Soviets are the ones with the revolutionary energy, right? And it's Soviet-aligned forces that have the revolutionary energy. Cuba is leading the Tricontinental Congress and, arming revolutionaries all throughout Latin America. They're Soviet-aligned. Gaddafi's Libya is aligned with the Soviet Union, and they're a big revolutionary force for energy. Meanwhile, China starts supporting CIA, anti-communists in Angola, and China, says that, the Soviet Union are social imperialists, and pretty soon Nixon's in China, and China's supporting Pinochet. So at about, at the beginning of the Sino-Soviet split, the Chinese were presenting themselves as the revolutionary anti-imperialists. The Soviets were presenting themselves as the moderates. Happy birthday to Lenin. Ha ha ha. Yeah, indeed. Then, in about 1969, 1970, they flipped. So there you go. It's kind of bizarre. All right. Okay. What do I do to relax? I never relax. Who do you think you think I'm a relaxer? Do I look like a relaxer to you? I'm just kidding. No, I love to watch vampire movies. I love Hammer Film Productions, movie studio in the 1970s, made great, fun Hammer horror films. I love that. Love those movies. What else? I read books. I do all kinds of things. All right. Chilean economic miracle. Read Naomi Klein and her book, The Shock Doctrine. And she rips to shreds the myth of the Chilean economic miracle. In 1973, when Pinochet took power in Chile, it wrecked Chile's economy. It was an absolute disaster, right? Everybody admits that. 30% unemployment, mass crisis of malnutrition, children fainting in school because they don't have enough food. It was a nightmare. Things in Chile didn't get better until the early 1980s. And what happened in the early 1980s? Pinochet kicked out Milton Friedman. And the Pinochet regime started renationalizing industries and moving away from libertarian economic policies. And the episode of growth that you saw in Chile in the 80s had nothing to do with Milton Friedman's economic policies. It happened when they abandoned his policies. And the fact that libertarians can't see that is shocking to me. When libertarian policies were imposed on Chile, they wrecked the country. And later, when Milton Friedman went to Israel in the administration of Menachem Begin, he wrecked Israel's economy. And when Milton Friedman was in the United States in the first 2 years of Nixon's presidency, he wrecked our economy. Milton Friedman wrecks economies. His monetary policies, he's the father of monetarism. He wrecks economies. He wrecked the U.S. economy, and then Nixon had to implement his Nixon shocks, kicked him out of the White House. He wrecked the Chilean economy. He wrecked the economy of Israel. Milton Friedman sucks, okay? If you can't notice this, everywhere Milton Friedman goes, the economy breaks, right? If you had somebody who was if you had a carpet cleaner, okay? And he went to one person's apartment, and he was supposed to clean the carpet, and instead he ruined it and ripped it to shreds. And then he went to somebody else's apartment, and he was supposed to clean their carpet, and instead he ruined it and he ripped it to shreds. And then he went to someone else's apartment and ruined their apartment and ripped it to shreds. You would say, this guy is not a good carpet cleaner, unless you're a libertarian. You'd say, that's amazing. He's a genius. It's amazing. He wrecked the U.S. economy under Richard Nixon. He wrecked the Chilean economy under Pinochet. He wrecked the Israeli economy under Menachem Begin. So, how is this guy? It's like this guy broke everything he touched. He was an awful economist, Chile included. All right. Okay. Australia distancing itself from China. Well, of course, Australia is part of the West, right? I mean, even though it's not, it's nowhere near Europe, it's considered part of the mythology of the mythos of the West, right? It's an Anglo country, right? And because of that, because of its ties with the United States, the USA is twisting Australia's arm and pressuring it. The question is, will the Australians put up with it or not? Because it's not going to be good for their economy, right? Australia, their economy has been doing very, very well over the last few decades, about the last decade especially. Are they going to just let that all fall to shreds to make America happy, right? Just like the USA wants to twist the arm of the Germans to force the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, right? It's like, oh, you can't do the Nord Stream 2 pipe. The USA expects the whole world to just, screw itself over in order to help American capitalism. I don't think the rest of the world wants to do that. I really don't. Okay. My photo with AOC, will she be canceled? No. Everyone knows she doesn't agree with me. So there you go. That's the thing, right? And AOC is not somebody they want to cancel. They cancel you for being anti-imperialist. That's what they do, right? If you're anti-imperialist or if you put out right-wing ideas that hurt the image of American imperialism, they cancel you. But if you're, if you are doing things that help the agenda of the upper wing of the ruling class, they ignore it, right? Vaush should have been canceled 1,000 times. Look at some of the things Vaush has said about trans people. Look at some of the things Vaush has said about, just look, there's all kinds of clips of Vaush saying cancelable things all over the internet, but they don't do it. The algorithms are rigged in his favor. Even though he doesn't know what he's talking about, he takes Marx quotes out of context. He doesn't even know what they're saying. Other people assemble them to him and read them to him, and he says, oh, Marx meant to vote for Biden. See, according to... He doesn't even know what these quotes mean. Somebody else finds them and feeds them to him. He's a clown. But he's not going to get canceled no matter how many bigoted things he says about trans people or this or that. He's not going to get canceled, right? No matter how nasty he is to people, in the developing world, no matter how ridiculous he is, he's not going to get canceled because his views are in line with imperialism. Look, the reason, let's be real about this. And I've said this on other streams, but I'm going to say it again, right? The imperialists want to clean up their image. They want America to have a woke makeover. They don't want people to know how ugly this society really is. The United States is a society that is dripping with racism, dripping with sexism and settler colonialism, inequality, and poverty. And Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates want to clean up the image of the United States so that all the people around the world think the United States is a great, woke, liberal alternative to Russia and China. They want to castigate Russia and China and say, you're authoritarian, you're traditional, but look at us here in America. We're this woke new country. And the Ku Klux Klan and the American Nazi Party and the, Richard Spencer and all those people are an ugly reminder of what America is all about. America was founded on slavery. America was founded on the genocide of the Native Americans. America is a highly militarized society. You go to the South, the southern United States, the Florida Panhandle, Alabama, Mississippi, places like that. This is a military country, right? This is a country full of militarism, racism, poverty, police state, man's inhumanity to man. And Jeff Bezos and all of them realize the whole world can turn on RT or can turn on CGTN and see what America's really like. And so they want to tweak the image. They want everyone to think America's a nice, touchy-feely, liberal, woke country full of iPods and iPhones. That's what they're trying to do. And it ain't, right? And we should not be suckers. Don't be a sucker. Don't be a sucker. Because the left is being suckered right now. Our job, Jeff Bezos and all of them, want us to go around and help them give the United States a makeover. They want our job to, we're basically supposed to, as leftists, as good little leftists, Jeff Bezos says, America needs a woke makeover. And we say, yes, sir, Mr. Bezos. Yes, sir. And we go and we're supposed to cyberbully, shame, and cancel all the people that won't follow that order. Our job is to bully and shame and cancel and castigate and punish all the people that won't go along with the woke makeover so that Jeff Bezos and all of them can sell American imperialism. That's not what I want to do. I am not interested in shaming and castigating the hardworking people of this country who are suffering and perhaps turn to social conservatism and religion in their pain. I'm not interested in doing that. I'll disagree with them. I'm for LGBT rights. I'm for the right of a woman to have an abortion. I'll disagree with them, but I'm not going to shame and castigate them, in order to do that. I'm not interested in helping America get a woke makeover so that it can more effectively, beat back, the rise of Eurasia. I am interested in completely dismantling American imperialism. We need a new society. We need the banks and the factories and the industries and all the centers of economic power to be organized to serve public good and not profits. We need to build solidarity. Black and white, unite and fight. We need to build a community in the United States where people love each other. We need to draw from Christian principles, living for the sake of others. We need to draw from class struggle and solidarity. And we need to build an anti-capitalist political formula that can take this country in a whole new direction and dismantle imperialism, right? That's what we need. And that means love and kindness and compassion and brotherhood. And sisterhood. It doesn't mean tearing down and punishing the right-wing conservative workers who won't get in line with Jeff Bezos and his woke makeover for the empire. And thank you for the super chat. Right? So seriously, I'm not interested in cancel culture. I'm not interested in giving America a woke makeover. This country is what it is. Right? There is a reason. That the United States still has the death penalty. Even though we don't practice it in a way that is a deterrent, there's a reason we still have it, because this is a sick country, right? There's a reason that, 19 U.S. states still have corporal punishment in public schools, and we got teachers spanking kids on their bottoms with paddles. There's a reason for that. Why? Because this is a sick country. There's a reason we've got more people in prison than any other country in the world. It's because we're a sick country. And I'm not going to pretend we're not, and I'm not going to try to, clean that up, and I'm not going to go after people in this country that have been, intoxicated with the ideology and the mindset of this sick culture. I'm going to build solidarity. I'm going to build empathy and brotherhood and compassion and kindness and try to move beyond capitalism. And I'm going to draw from anti-imperialism, from Marxism-Leninism, from socialism, from revolutionary ideas, from Christianity, from America's past, the abolitionist movement, the suffragists, all kinds of different influences to eventually develop a socialism with American characteristics, a socialism rooted in America's culture and traditions that could actually take power and build a whole new country. That's what we should be doing. We are not Jeff Bezos' cultural cleanup crew. I am not interested in being part of Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates' cultural cleanup crew to save the empire. So, there you go. And if you're a real Marxist, a real socialist, you shouldn't be interested in that either. That is not your job. That is not your job. That is not your job. Not your job. They created this. This is their empire. This society that they're trying to clean up its image, this is their empire. I'm sorry. If they want to wage a cultural cleanup, they can do it on their own. I'm interested in building a whole new world. So there you go. I hope that made sense. It might be a little bit confusing because, people say, oh, he says it's not his job to fight racism. That's not what I said. But that's how they like to play the game. So there you go. All right. Richard Wolff is an amazing man. He does not agree with me on everything. I do not agree with him on everything. But he is an amazing man. He's a brilliant man. Every time I have ever been in his presence, I have learned something new. He always gives me new insights into Marxism. He's been studying Marxism his entire life. He's been teaching Marxism for decades and decades and decades. Brilliant man. Deeply admire him. Obviously, we have a different interpretation of Marxism. I come out of, my past, my roots are with Maoism and with Sam Marcy and the Marcyite, Trotskyite tradition, developing into my current view, which is 21st century socialism, socialism with American characteristics, the city building tendency. I have my own views, right? I have developed ideologically very different than he has. He comes out of Harvard and Yale and the elite schools and economics, as well as, as well as the Marxist movement and social democracy and And, he's been around a lot of different groups and, academic Marxism, and we have a different ideological background. That's fine. He's an amazing man, a brilliant man. I always learn from him. So I look up to him greatly, and it's really a pleasure to be able to work with him. Since the pandemic, I haven't been able to see him very much, but when he used to be around the office that I worked at, it was a privilege. It was a real privilege to be in Richard Wolff's presence. It was an absolute privilege, and I'm deeply honored that I had that privilege. A great man, a truly great man who I deeply respect. All right. Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein was the leader of Iraq. Iraq was a socialist country under his leadership. Ba'athist Arab socialism. The Soviet Union referred to it as a socialist-oriented government. He built a lot of hospitals. He built infrastructure for the country. But then, he got manipulated by the United States to attack Iran and to wage a vicious war against Iran. While his Ba'athist Arab socialism, there were significant achievements for the population in the late 1980s. The New York Times has commented on that. It was hit with sanctions. There was the Gulf War, and I think that in a lot of ways Saddam Hussein was unprincipled, but he was definitely an anti-imperialist. He was definitely a socialist, and what the United States did to Saddam Hussein was not justified. The invasion of Saddam Hussein of Iraq was not justified. The killing of Saddam Hussein was completely illegal. It was a sham trial. The lawyer Ramsey Clark, someone I worked with, said this isn't a real trial. It was a sham trial, and the way the execution was conducted was designed to foment sectarianism, religious sectarianism in the country. It was the whole situation. The USA went to Iraq hoping to destabilize the country, foment ethnic war, and they did a great job. The USA it didn't fail in Iraq. It wasn't defeated in Iraq. The USA very effectively destabilized Iraq, and the country has been in ruins and in sectarian division ever since. All right. What do you say to the people who say the DPRK is a monarchy? Well, I can understand why you might think that. Right? Because Kim Il-sung was the leader of the revolution, and after he died in 1994, Kim Jong-il became the head of state, and now Kim Jong-un, the grandson, is the head of state. So on the surface, you might think that. However, there is a very, very, very specific reason that this policy has been enacted. Very specific reason. First of all, you have to talk about why the extreme cult of personality around Kim Il-sung was created. Why is it that, you have a very extreme cult of personality around Kim Il-sung? It was because during the 1970s, there was a big divide, the Sino-Soviet split. And North Korea is very friendly with China, but North Korea was also very friendly with the Soviet Union. And it was very, very difficult for North Korea to be right there bordering China, but also very dependent on the Soviet Union. And so there were clearly Maoist factions in the Korean Workers' Party, as well as pro-Soviet factions in the Korean Workers' Party. So the cult of personality that emerged was rooted in a way of saying, we have our own great leader, we have our own ideology, juche, self-reliance, so we're not going to get embroiled in the pro-Soviet camp or in the pro-Chinese camp. It was a way to emphasize their neutrality. And it was also a way to maintain Korea's independence, right? And it was very important. If Korea had gotten too far into the Chinese camp, who knows what could have happened? Korea got too far into the pro-Soviet camp, who knows what could have happened? By maintaining its neutrality, by saying we have self-reliance, we have the juche ideology, that was a way that they could maintain their independence. And one of the main ways the United States was able to overthrow the Soviet Communist Party and the Communist Party, of various Eastern European countries, was they would manipulate the leaders of the party against each other, right? We know Gorbachev was a moderate, but what happened? There was the famous coup, where the hardliners kidnapped Gorbachev, right? And this happened all throughout the Eastern Bloc. The Soviet Communist parties would be divided between the moderates and the hardliners. And the moderates would be manipulated by the Americans. The hardliners would be, they would isolate the hardliners, court the moderates. This is how the game was played. So, 1994, North Korea, the Soviet Union has collapsed. North Korea is having an economic crisis. The leader, Kim Il-sung, dies. By having his son assume the leadership role, that was a way to make clear that nothing had changed in the country. That there was no new faction in power. There was no new, no division. It wasn't like hardliners and moderates. Kim Il-sung may have died, but look, his son's in power. End of discussion. The same thing happened later. It's a way to make clear that Korea has one unique line that is not the line, there's not hardliners and moderates in the party, there's not divisions, and that the revolutionary anti-imperialism of Kim Il-sung is still alive. It is a political statement. However, the Korean Workers' Party has millions of members. There are many, many people in the Korean Workers' Party. There are many, many government officials. There's all kinds of bodies of decision-making. It's not the rule by decree of one man, right? It's not what it is. There is one head of state, that is true, but there are many decision-making bodies in the country. And that having that man be the son and now grandson of the founder of the revolution, that is a way of making clear that the Korean Workers' Party is still divided, or is still unified. There's not a hardliner and moderate faction. There's no division, number one. Number two, making clear that the revolutionary ideas of Kim Il-sung are not being watered down. It is vitally important, for ideological reasons for the country. You do not know what North Korea has been through. 4 million people died from U.S. bombs during the Korean War. Every single building over 1 story tall got bombed, right? You cannot imagine what the United States did during the Korean War. The atrocities and the war crimes were horrendous. And then, when the Soviet Union fell, their food system came to a grinding halt because American imperialism would not let them import oil. With the petrodollar, we prevented them from importing petroleum. So then, millions of people began starving to death, in the early 90s. Every person in North Korea has a family member or a relative who died because of American imperialism, whether it was in the 1950s during the Korean War or whether it was in the 1990s during the arduous march when the USA imposed horrendous economic sanctions. And the Korean people have been fighting like crazy. And that's why, people want to demonize them for the militarized discipline. And when you are fighting for your life, like the Korean people have been, that's what happens, right? I'm sorry, they are a people at war. It is a military situation. Half of their country is still occupied by U.S. troops. They're facing sanctions. Again, this is not, it's not like they had a blank piece of paper and could design any society they wanted, right? That's what's wrong with Destiny. This Destiny guy, he thinks that when you have socialism, it's a game of SimCity. He thinks it's SimCity. You ever play SimCity? That's what he thinks it is. It's SimCity, and once you get socialism, you just play SimCity. It's not like that, right? North Korea is fighting for its life, and in the circumstances they are in, they have developed a socialist model that is very authoritarian, is very militarized in order to survive. That's what they've done. And the aspects of it that you may not like, I'm sure there are people in North Korea that would probably prefer that things be different, but they are fighting for their life. So there you go. Workers' Party of Belgium. Well, the Workers' Party of Belgium is an anti-imperialist party in Belgium. It's a Marxist-Leninist party. Every year they would convene they convened a global conference of Marxist-Leninist parties. They're anti-revisionists. I think they were Maoists, but I think they're more just kind of mainline Marxist-Leninists. For a long time, their leader was a guy named Ludo Martens, but now they have a new leader, I believe. And yeah, it's a Marxist-Leninist, anti-imperialist political party in Belgium. And they're a pretty big, compared to most parties of that type, they're pretty big. They're bigger than most of the socialist groups in Belgium, which is kind of an anomaly. Usually the main socialist group is a social democratic group, and then you have a much smaller communist party, and then some Maoist, Trotskyist groups. Belgium is kind of the exception. In Belgium, the Workers' Party of Belgium is a much bigger organization, which is interesting. And I've met them at international communist gatherings. Someone said, "Why is the China-Vietnam relationship not good?" Well, I wouldn't put it that way. Look, they have a lot of tension between them. China invaded Vietnam, and there are times where Vietnam is not completely friendly to China, but they still have a relationship. They still trade with each other. It's not like a perfect relationship. There's certainly tension between the two countries, but I wouldn't say that it's completely bad. Luna Oy, check out her streams. She does great, and she talks about that. Luna Oy, she talks about there is tension there. Okay, all right. Americans who oppose China. All right. Okay, next question. William Z. Foster, amazing man, the greatest American communist who ever lived. William Z. Foster, I did a whole 2-hour stream with Brent Langle that I then added video and clips to. Go watch The Legend of William Z. Foster. Read his books. His History of the Three International is the most important book I've ever read. He was a mass organizer. He was a mass organizer who was, very, very dedicated to, very, very dedicated to working hard, and building the labor movement, unionizing steel, etc. Just a great, great person all around. Leader of the Communist Party, anti-revisionist, friend of Mao, personal friend of Mao Zedong, went to prison, made great sacrifices. All right. Great, great person. Go watch my video, The Legend of William Z. Foster. All right. Freemasonry. What is Freemasonry? Well, at the time that feudalism existed, the capitalists were getting ready to eventually emerge and overthrow feudalism and overthrow the Catholic Church. You didn't really have the freedom to do that. It was considered heresy, right? If you said the Catholic Church was wrong, you could be burned at the stake or have your head cut off. So as the capitalists were organizing to take power, they formed secret societies. One of those secret societies was called the Bavarian Illuminati, and it was in Bavaria in the 1700s. And they got caught, and they got executed. But all the conspiracy theories about the Illuminati, well, that's what the Illuminati was. It was this group of Bavarian capitalists who wanted to bring down the Catholic Church in Bavaria, right? And in Britain, Freemasonry was a very big tendency. I believe, many of the British statesmen or, political figures of the 1700s and 1800s were Freemasons. A lot of our founding fathers in the United States were Freemasons. Masonry is like a club. It's a club. They say it's they find good men and make them better. It's like a fraternity. On the surface, it's just a kind of fraternity. The longer you've been in the group, the more you realize that, they do, from what I understand, they do have kind of Unitarian beliefs, right? That there is only one God, but there's he's represented through different religions. Masons, they study the Quran and the Bible and compare them, things like that. But, it's kind of this vague universal values, freedom is good, and, they're considered to be anti-Catholic. The Catholic Church frequently condemned Masonry throughout its history. So there you go. CPUSA's stance on anti-imperialism. Stance. We are going to be here all night. I'm just going to start blowing through these. All right. Okay, criticism of China projects in Africa. Go read, the CPGBML. They wrote a great article about the mythology of the debt trap, and a lot of what we hear about that is just not accurate. But I mean, is it possible that Chinese companies are doing bad things? Sure, yeah. I mean, Chinese companies can do bad things, but does that prove that therefore China's the same as the United States or it's capitalist? No. And China, what it's doing across Africa tends to be very, very good. All right. Mainstream media lying on China. Why does it lie on China? Because China's a competitor with the United States. Every phone that Huawei Technologies sells is purchased, that's a phone somebody didn't buy from an American cell phone company. Every ounce of steel someone buys from China, which makes half the steel in the world, is an ounce of steel somebody didn't buy from an American steel corporation. China used to be a captive market for the American imperialists. Now it is a competitor, and the U.S. imperialists don't like competition. All righty. Libertarianism is a capitalist ideology. Absolutely. Absolutely. David Fox is absolutely right. The reason working families throughout the United States don't have, decent roads and infrastructure is because of this ideology. Oh, we got to get the government out of it. It's a nutty ideology. Libertarianism is economic insanity. It's failed everywhere it's ever been tried, and it's a nightmare. All right, video games versus streaming. Well, I think there's game streaming where you play video games and they stream the content, right? But then I'm just streaming right now. I don't play video games myself, never developed the habit. But, if you do, that's fine. That's your business. But yeah, there's a difference. Okay. Socialist monopolism. Well, look, if you have a state-run industry that's not operating according to the chaos of the market, right, but it's simply a state industry that has a monopoly, it's very different than a capitalist institution that is trying to make profits in an atmosphere of unfair competition. Completely different. All right. Derek Chauvin. He got convicted. I mean, look at the video. I'm sorry. You can't do that. Can't choke people to death. I'm sorry. And he would not have gotten the trial he got. He got a fair trial and was convicted. That would never have happened if people hadn't protested. When I was in college, all these people said to me, protesting doesn't do anything, Caleb. And I would say, really? Who is Dr. Martin Luther King? And it's like, well, he wasn't a protester. He's like a good guy. There's a holiday named for him. Oh, okay. All these people, protesting doesn't do anything. Right? Go vote. Write a letter to your congressman. Well, if all the people that had taken to the streets last summer had just gone to vote or just written a letter to their congressman, Derek Chauvin would not have gotten a fair trial. And he got a fair trial, and he was convicted because he took the life of George Floyd. He killed George Floyd. The whole world saw that, and there you go. Risk in capitalism. Well, this is the argument. The capitalist says, look, I'm investing. I'm risking my money, in this company, so I deserve to make money. That's the argument capitalists generally make. Look, the argument against capitalism is not simply that it's not fair, right? And I guess if that was the only argument against capitalism was it's not fair, there might be something to that, right? If we were just sitting here like children, the workers get less money than the capitalists, it's not fair. Oh, God, and we just cried and just said it's not fair, which is what libertarians think we do. They never actually argue against actual Marxism. They argue against a gross caricature, right? And so they think that we just sit here and we go, it's not fair. And they say, it is fair because the capitalists risked for that enterprise. Bum, bum, bum. Well, here's the thing. The problem isn't simply that it's not fair, which, I mean, there is a problem, right? That the capitalist is profiting from the surplus value created by the worker. That is not fair. But at the same time, there's more to it than that. The problem is that production organized for profits leads to all kinds of huge problems in society, like mass unemployment, like overproduction and gluts, an environmental crisis and climate change, like wars for profit and prisons for profit. I mean, there are much bigger problems with capitalism than simply it's not fair. And so this risk argument is just a response to it's not fair. Yeah, it's fair. He risks it. The other thing is the capitalist state frequently intervenes to protect capitalists, right? Too big to fail, right? So next time someone's about to lose their home, say, oh, their home is too big to fail. No, but frequently capitalist institutions get propped up and subsidized and rescued from the risk, right? They don't really have the risk, right? Workers lose their jobs, it's always the working class that has to pay for the crisis created by capitalism. All right, eminent domain. That's in the U.S. Constitution. The government has the right to take your property as long as they pay you for it. It's in the U.S. Constitution. The state can seize property, and that's necessary. Look, I mean, if you're a government, you're going to have to build an army base. Well, if you want to build your army base someplace, and someone says you can't build it there, I own it. What are you going to do, right? Now, eminent domain, I will say, has expanded greatly in the past few years, past few decades. And there are some uses of eminent domain that are pretty, like, ridiculous, right? Eminent domain, in theory, is so the government can seize property, generally land, right? If the government needs to build a highway or a building or a prison or military, if they want to build something in a place, the government can use eminent domain for government purposes. But in some states, eminent domain has now become the government can take the land and give it to a private corporation. And that's downright ridiculous, right? But yeah, basically, in a lot of places, if the tax revenue of the city will improve, right? So say you have a house, right? And the government says, if we tore down your house and built a giant shopping mall, not a government shopping mall, but a shopping mall for a private company, but that made tax revenue go up, that would be eminent domain. I can understand why libertarians are upset about that, right? Eminent domain is supposed to be so the government can build government things. In theory, it's not supposed to be so the government can redistribute things to other parts of the private sector. But that's another example. Let me emphasize again, this is another example of wealth redistribution, right? Every system in the world has wealth redistribution. Eminent domain is wealth redistribution, right? The government takes your property and pays you market value for it, whatever they think that is. The government does have the right to seize property. I was watching Fox News one time. I will never forget this. I was watching Fox News, and they said, one of these Fox News experts, he says, the government, they can tax income. They can't tax property. People tax property all the time. What do you think property taxes are? People pay taxes when they buy a car. They pay sales tax on it. People pay property taxes in municipalities all the time. Oh, it's one thing for the government to, I think it was one of these Fox News, it's one thing for the government to tax incomes, but they can't tax property. Yes, they can. Libertarians say dumb shit like this all the time, right? Like the woman who said there'd be no monopolies if there weren't government. No one calls them out on it, right? It's unbelievable. Someone asked about some kind of revolutionary center in Libya led by Gaddafi. I've never heard of this. It doesn't surprise me that such a thing existed. Gaddafi was all about promoting revolution, and he supported the IRA, he supported the Palestinians, he supported the people of South Africa against apartheid. All kinds of revolutionary movements all over the world benefited from Gaddafi's support. But this particular revolutionary center you named, I've never heard of it. Marx talked about the Paris Commune. You should go read The Civil War in France. Go read The Civil War in France, which is a great pamphlet by Karl Marx, his assessment of the Paris Commune. And look, Vosch lies. He has this quote from that pamphlet where he says that they can't take hold of the ready-made state machinery, which is true, right? They had to create new institutions, a new army, new courts, etc. in the Paris Commune. Vosch takes that to say that Marx didn't believe in any state central government. And it's like, if you read Civil War in France, it's the opposite. Marx talks about how they created a new central government. Vosch just lies. He either lies or he's just never read it. That quote that the anarchids use is just, it's just, they say things like Marx wasn't a statist because of this one quote. And it's like, no, that quote means that you have to build new institutions for a new state. It doesn't mean that there should be no state central planning. That's ridiculous. All right, crypto-fascism, crypto-communism. There's very little of either, right? Right? USA turning into a military dictatorship. All right. Okay, we're just churning through these. Churning through them. All right. Alrighty. Okay, where do we go? Okay. Alrighty. Crypto-fascism, crypto-communism. Well, the idea of both of those things is there's people that say that they're something when they're actually something else, right? That there's people in the government that say that they're conservatives or liberals, but are actually members of the Nazi Party, thank you, Austin, or members of the Communist Party. That's not the case, okay? There's very little of both of those, okay? Look, in the McCarthy period, right, if anyone got up and said anything slightly left-wing, if someone said, I think we should tax the rich more, they'd be like, he's a crypto-communist. Don't you know? It's in the Communist Manifesto. Redistribute wealth, income tax. See, he's a commie. He's saying he's a liberal. He's actually a commie. Well, that was bullshit. That was just like silly McCarthyism. Same. You know, nowadays, our job as liberals, we're not supposed to be questioning American capitalism and imperialism. No. Our job is we're supposed to be pointing at conservatives and saying, you're a secret Nazi. Yeah, no. Very few conservatives are secret Nazis. Very few liberals are secret communists. And this is a total distraction, right? Liberalism is an attempt to manage capitalism and make it work more effectively. Conservatism is an attempt to, lift restraints and, and have the capitalist system be more blatantly vicious. Conservatism is not crypto-fascism. Liberalism is not crypto-communism. Communism is communism. Fascism is fascism. Liberalism is liberalism. Conservatism is conservatism. And I will say, let me point this out, most fascists in the United States, most white supremacists, are just puppets of the Trump movement. Trump was not a fascist, right? But most people who became infected with the fascist ideology were useful idiots for Donald Trump. They heard Donald Trump, he gave them the wink and the nod and said words that they liked to hear, and they thought he was with them, and so they went and did his dirty work and, did the QAnon thing and attacked the Capitol on January 6th, and they were useful idiots, right? The fascists and neo-Nazis didn't control Trump. Trump duped and manipulated and used them for his own ends. And unfortunately, most communists in the United States, they are the same thing, right? That they basically, they believe in communism, but at the end of the day, they're just useful idiots for the liberals, right? They're used by the liberals to carry out their ends, right? So it's not that the liberals are crypto-communists and Trump is a crypto-fascist. Rather, actual fascists are useful idiots for Donald Trump, who's not a fascist, and communists tend to be useful idiots for liberals who are not communists, right? And my argument is we need to get to the masses and build a real socialist movement, and, that's my belief, and that fascism will be refuted by workers' solidarity, black and white, unite and fight. There you go. All right. Okay. Workers' councils in the USA. Well, look, every socialist society develops some kind of workers' council. Look, the Soviets, what was the Soviet? It was these councils the Bolsheviks built during the Russian Revolution that were the basis of, on a local level, coordinating support for the revolution. In Cuba, every neighborhood has committees to defend the revolution. In Bolivia, in Nicaragua, they have citizens' power councils. Every revolutionary government, in order to stay in power, does this. In Iran, they have the Basij, they are called, which are in every neighborhood. They're like these community organizations that support the Islamic Revolution. In China, the Chinese Communist Party, they had peasant associations, they had factory associations. The Chinese Communist Party has a local organizer in every apartment building. And this is how, and in this sense, right, even though in Iran and in China and in Cuba, you may not have the level of free speech we have in the West, you could argue that there's a way these countries are more democratic in that the regime, the government, depends on this mobilized apparatus of support in order to enact its will. In the United States, we don't have that. We got the cops. That's about it. We have we don't have that. The state is not actively mobilizing the population, consulting with them in order to carry out its goals. We don't have that. Capitalist countries do not have that. You don't have mobilizations of the population to carry out the will of the revolution. We don't have that, right? But anti-imperialist and revolutionary, anti-capitalist, socialist countries tend to have that. They have a mobilized population. They have these community assemblies, these popular democratic institutions that lay the basis for carrying out the agenda of the revolutionary bodies that are leading the state. There's a great book called We Created Chavez, which is about, in Venezuela, the colectivos and the communes that are the basis of Bolivarianism. Every revolutionary government has had to develop this. In Libya, they called these things, they called them popular assemblies, and they were the basis of Gaddafi's revolutionary government. So and of course in the United States, such things would develop. Community power assemblies and things like that would have to develop over the course of the USA moving towards socialism. Populism. Yes, populism in the United States. There's a long history of American working people fighting against capitalism. And that's why I wanted to debate Stixenhammer, whatever his name is. The reason I wanted to debate him is he claimed that American populism was never anti-capitalist. And that's so wrong, I don't even know where to begin. That's why I wanted to debate him, to defend the legacy of American populism. He was too chicken to debate me. But he did, get me a few hundred subscribers, so that was nice. All right. Signs of Marx's ideology before Marx. Well, sure, right? Before Karl Marx, you had the first working class movement in the world, the Chartist movement, which was like a labor movement that developed in Britain, the Chartists. You had, the rise of utopian socialism. The word socialism was invented by Henry Saint-Simon in France. You had Robert Owen in Britain. You had, various figures that were espousing, getting to similar conclusions. Getting to similar conclusions as Marx. But Marx ultimately, and you have to remember the socialist movement back then was highly competitive, which is really unfortunate. But, the reason every single Marx book is a polemic against somebody is because the socialist movement, he was competing. He was competing with Lassalle. He was competing with Proudhon. Marx was trying to prove that he was the great revolutionary theoretician, not these other guys. And, that's how it was. And yes, as Marx said, the Communist Manifesto, and thank you for the super chat, the Communist Manifesto begins with the words, "A specter is haunting Europe," the specter of communism, meaning that the ideas that Marx was preaching were everywhere. They were everywhere. But the Communist Manifesto was an attempt to put them in writing. So there you go. All righty. Jesus Christ, the first socialist in history. Well, I think that, that it's very clear that the movement in Palestine that Jesus Christ was associated with, some argue Jesus is a composite figure. He's based on many figures in ancient Palestine. Some argue that, there was actually a historical Jesus, but regardless, the zealots, those who led revolts against the Roman Empire, they did tend to live communally. You can read about the Essene Jews and the movements of Jews that resisted the Roman Empire. They lived communistically in a utopian communist sense. And the teachings of Jesus became a vehicle for the Roman proletariat to fight for its rights. So in that sense, sure. Persecution of religion in socialist societies, big mistake. Absolutely a big mistake. Religion and socialism, I think religion has a place in socialist societies. People should be free to practice their faith. There should, China has changed the way it operates on this, right? And the Soviet Union, there was a lot of persecution at one point, but, the Soviet Union in the 1980s, Billy Graham, Reverend Billy Graham, the most famous American televangelist pastor, went to the Soviet Union. He came back in the early 80s. He said, there's no persecution of Christians. There's more people at church, and I went to church all over the Soviet Union. And he immediately got canceled for saying that. And he had to apologize for saying that. But it was true, right? In the 80s, there was all kinds of Christianity in the Soviet Union, right? Stalin legalized the Russian Orthodox Church during World War II, and it was a part of Russian society. And now you go to Russia, the Russian Orthodox Church is very anti-capitalist. It's very critical of Western capitalism. It honors the Soviet Union and its efforts to defeat fascism. It sees the Soviet Union as a positive development in the history, despite its criticisms of other things about the Soviet Union. But I would say that today in Russia, the Russian Orthodox Church is one of the main anti-imperialist institutions, right? It pushes Russia's unique identity in opposition to the West. So there you go. I already said that I do feel Derek Chauvin. You're very welcome. You're very welcome. I'm doing the best I can. We're almost done here, but I'm just getting through all these super chats. I do feel that Derek Chauvin had a fair trial. I do feel he was guilty of the crime of which he was convicted. He murdered George Floyd. And I hope it's not thrown out on appeal. It would be good to have cops know that if they kill somebody like that, they may have to face some consequences. I think that's a good thing, right? I've been taught. Look, let me say this before I move on. When I was in Cleveland, right, years ago, when I had the long hair and the beard and I was an activist in Cleveland and I filmed an instance of police brutality and got some people acquitted in court and was going to court with police brutality victims, my family, my classmates at the university all rolled their eyes every time I talked about police brutality. I'd say the police brutalized this person. They'd be like, "Oh boy, you're one of those, aren't you?" And they would roll their eyes at me. And I would tell my family about these police brutality cases that I was volunteering around as a communist activist, and people would go, "Oh boy, yeah. Oh, I'm sure, yeah. Oh, look at you. You're just like Ice Cube, aren't you, Caleb? You're a rapper." They thought I was making it all up. They thought I was crazy. They thought I was being manipulated. And now everyone's talking about police brutality. Everyone admits that I was right all along. Normies were wrong. I was right. There you go. I was talking about police brutality. I was taking the bus from Berea, where I went to college, all the way over to the east side of Cleveland to go to demonstrations with Art McCoy and Black on Black Crime Incorporated to stand against police brutality. Every year on October 22nd, the Revolutionary Communist Party would organize a big rally at the Justice Center in Cleveland about police brutality. And people thought we were crazy. People thought we were a fringe. And now the whole country realizes that we were right the whole time. Just saying, right? The whole country realizes that what communists and black nationalists were talking about for decade after decade after decade, now the whole country realizes that we were right. People thought we were kooks. People thought we were extremists. People said, America's a good country. We don't have racist police. That's just made up. That's not true. There's no racism in America. Well, there you go. Just saying. We communists tend to have a pretty good track record on this. Just saying, before the Iraq War, when everyone was convinced Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, we had to invade Iraq to not get attacked with those weapons of mass destruction. Communists protested that war. Look how that worked out. Right? Communists protested the invasion of Libya. Look how that worked out. Oh, geez, communists marched for civil rights long before Martin Luther King, became a household name. There was the Civil Rights Congress. There was the Scottsboro Nine. Women in the Soviet Union had the right to vote before women in America did. Women in America didn't get the right to vote in every state until 1920. 1917, Bolsheviks took over the Soviet Union. All women could vote. So, we have a pretty good track record on these things. Just saying. There you go. Propaganda. Person asked about propaganda. Well, look, the term propaganda has different definitions of it. The general definition of propaganda is material intended to persuade you to believe in a certain way, right? Now, there is, in What Is to Be Done by Lenin, he defines the term propaganda differently. So I'm going to differentiate between the general understanding. Look, if someone's trying to convince you to believe something, and they write a book or give a speech or make a documentary trying to convince you to believe something, that's propaganda. That's generally how we understand it, right? And the thing is, if you like it, it's not propaganda. It's just persuasive material that puts forward a position. But if you don't like it, it's propaganda. And it's just, it's one of those terms, right? If you like it, it's a government. If you don't like it, it's a regime. That's that. Okay. Now, the scientific term, the way Lenin uses the term propaganda is Lenin, when he writes the book, What Is to Be Done, Lenin differentiates between agitation and propaganda. He says the Bolsheviks have two tasks. They agitate to the broad masses, and they propagate to the advanced, right? That the idea is that in Russia in the early 1900s, where 65% of the population are illiterate, that you agitate to stir up a confrontation, to create strikes, to create rebellion among society. Agitation, just kind of stirring people to rebel and to have confrontation, that's agitation. And that propaganda is teaching Marxism. Right, propagating Marxist ideas. You only propagate to the advanced, the people that are capable of becoming communists, and you agitate to the broad masses, right? And that's part of What Is to Be Done and the Bolshevik theory of how to take power. It's in What Is to Be Done by Lenin. All right. Are mass protests the new norm in the United States? Yes, and that's what happens when there are big divisions in the ruling class, right? When there are big divisions in the ruling class, you tend to have the capitalists mobilizing sections of the population. And this was the case in the 1960s and 70s. You had, the big protest movements in the United States. This was the case in, the 1930s. You had big protest movements of the left and the right in the United States. And yes, in our time, there are big divisions in the ruling class rooted in the capitalist crisis. So yes, there are big mobilizations of the workers. And I think we will continue to see that until the crisis ends. All right. How can you take pride in your work when you're exploited? Well, a lot of working class people, are so alienated from their labor, they take pride in other things, right? I mean, a lot of people, they just go to the job to pay their bills. Look, when I was working at the insurance company, do you think I walked out of my office every day? Oh boy, I made lots of money for an insurance company. These people wouldn't have a policy if it wasn't for me. Well, no, of course not. I didn't take pride in my work. I was there to pay my bills. right? And I worked in fast food, or I worked like cleaning, dorms, or I mean, many of the jobs, gas station, attendants. I mean, when I had those jobs, do you think I worked there because I wanted to, I wanted to like, no, right now, there are other areas of life that people do take pride in their work. And this idea, and it is kind of a privilege that a lot of people in like the petty bourgeoisie have. Lawyers can kind of quote unquote take pride in their work, right? Writers, college, that is something that comes, with more middle class, right? When there's more of a petty bourgeois position comes more of an investment in one's actual career. And so there's an element of privilege in that. But, for most, most working people that just go to their job, they're selling their labor power, and that's fine, right? You have to pay your bills. You have to support yourself. I don't think you should have to feel proud of the work that you do, especially if you're working in a very alienating job. Look, there you go. All right. Metaphysics, can't get into it. I don't know enough about philosophy to really answer that. How would the world look if we lost World War II? Pretty shitty. I think that if the United States had lost World War II, and the Soviets had lost World War II, and the Chinese people that were defeating the Japanese fascists had lost World War II, the world would look pretty shitty. I don't know why someone asked me that, but it's a nightmare. The world would be a nightmare right now, I think. There you go. What do you say to Americans who oppose China? I'll put it this way. China is the fastest growing economy in the world today. Millions of people being raised out of poverty, the fastest trains in the world, the fastest supercomputers in the world. Now, do we want to work with them and maybe benefit from their success, figure out ways we can team up and both benefit? Or do we want to isolate ourselves from that so that we don't get anything good from that? It's just kind of common sense, it's kind of like, if somebody, if there's somebody in your neighborhood who's, making a lot of money and doing a lot of good things, do you want to make them your enemy? Or do you want to be friends with them? So maybe you could start a joint venture or something, right? If somebody's doing well, you generally want to do well with them. Why in the world would you want, especially now with mass unemployment in the United States and crumbling infrastructure and all, why would we want to be fighting with China? China builds roads really well. China builds trains really, really well. China's economy is growing by leaps and bounds. With so many Americans who need decent roads in their neighborhoods, need decent trains, need decent jobs, why in the world would we want to fight with China? Right? Forget about communism, forget about imperialism, forget all the stuff. It's just not common sense. China is doing really damn well. And if we get along with China and cooperate, we can benefit from that. But if we're fighting with China, then we're not going to get any of that. Right? Just kind of common sense. Okay. Someone's doing really, really well. If you can get along with them and have a relationship, you can benefit from it. But if you cut yourself off from it, you ain't going to benefit from it. So there you go. Okay. What is the CPUSA stance on anti-imperialism? I am not a member of the Communist Party USA, so I would recommend you speak to someone who is, and ask them their position on it. I would assume that as the Communist Party USA is a Marxist-Leninist organization, as they are friendly with anti-imperialist countries like China and Cuba and Venezuela, I think they would pretty clearly take a pretty standard anti-imperialist position, but talk to them, right? I'm not with them. I don't represent them. I'm not a member of the Communist Party or any political party. There you go. Okay. USA turning into a military dictatorship. Well, obviously that would be a form of Bonapartism that could happen. The military could seize the government. Again, I don't think there's enough unity within the military to pull that off. I also don't think that, I think there's a lot of the ruling class here, the intelligence apparatus and stuff that would oppose that kind of thing. That's kind of thing happens when capitalism is in a state of crisis. You get things like military dictatorships being set up. So yeah, there you go. It's possible, right? That that's what happens in times of crisis is you get Bonapartism. You get one section of the ruling class trying to seize power in order to stabilize capitalism. Will that happen here? It might be what they want. They tried to do that during the Roosevelt years. There was the business plot where there was an attempted military coup against Roosevelt. So it's possible, but at this point, I don't think there is enough unity within one section of the ruling class to really pull that off. I think the ruling class is too divided at this point to really pull that off. All right, folks, thank you. I'm glad I was able to answer all those super chat questions. Hey, whatever I can do. Folks, we will cut it off here. It's a pleasure to interact with all of you. I'm sure I'll be back on within the next couple days at some point. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression, but the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.